Good morning to all today's participants. Today's slides and presentations will begin at 8:15. Sit back and we'll be with you in just a few minutes. Good morning once again, everyone. Participants are still joining, and we'll begin our presentation in about 5 minutes.
There's a reason Houston is called the Bayou City. The more than 2,500 miles of waterways in 22 watersheds of the city and county, which ultimately flow into the Gulf of Mexico. From Armand Bayou and Clear Creek in the south to Greens Bayou and Spring Creek in the north, bayous are part of what makes Houston unique. Bayou Preservation Association works to ensure that we celebrate, protect, and restore, or CPR if you will, the natural richness of all of our bayous and streams, which are virtually and vitally important to our ecosystem and our quality of life. If 2020 taught us anything, it's that green spaces are more important than ever. Bayous and our waterways at large are arguably our region's greatest natural resource. They are the freshwater arteries and green vines that keep our city alive. The health of our bayous determines the health of our bays and the Gulf, which determine the health of industry and our economy, which ultimately affects the health of all of our region's residents, human and animal alike. Our bayous and their riparian corridors, natural land, and along those waterways are the vital, essential thing that we need to protect. In fact, stepping back, in 1966, a group of homeowners in Houston's Memorial Park actually formed what is then called the Buffalo Bayou Preservation Association to protect the natural beauty of their neighborhood bayou. Although the nonprofit began with a focus on Buffalo Bayou, by 1969 members realized that their concerns for Buffalo Bayou applied to all of Houston and Harris County's watersheds, and the organization was renamed Bayou Preservation Association. Ongoing programs include stream corridor restoration, bayou citizen science, trash-free bayous, and bayou appreciation. Advocacy, education, and outreach run through all of our ongoing programs. Stream corridor restoration projects include a 45-acre riparian band of coastal forest along Clear Creek in Challenger 7 Memorial Park, partnering with the Galveston Bay Estuary Program, Harris County Precinct 1, the Student Conservation Association, and others. Achieving 90% removal of invasive plants here and in other targeted areas is the organization's standard. Under our Bayou Citizen Science program, Bayou Preservation Association acts as a Texas Stream Team group under the Houston-Galveston Area Council. The organization trains volunteers who conduct and submit water quality testing and field observation results. The Trash-Free Bayous Committee works closely with the City of Houston's Community Health Improvement Program on identifying and addressing the most littered waterways in Houston. Regular litter cleanups are conducted with volunteers or in partnership with local communities, bayou organizations, businesses, and regional parks. Accomplishments include the cleanup and prevention project at Berry Ditch, where decades of sediment, trash, and even litter in the waterways and banks were removed through agreements with Harris County Flood Control District and Buffalo Bayou Partnership. Now, the Bayou Appreciation Program promotes recreational opportunities for people to really experience our bayous firsthand with safe, enjoyable, and informative outdoor activities. The organization is building its technological capacity to pilot virtual hikes along riparian areas as a way to educate more residents about the values and functions of our bayou system. Our annual symposium has become a sought-after educational event among key policymakers, planners, scientists, engineers, and interested citizens who value the expertise presented by our informed panels. About 200 individuals attend each year to learn about emerging watershed issues and to discuss possible solutions. All of these programs support Bayou Preservation Association's goal of increasing stewardship opportunities to improve the health of our watersheds, creeks, and our bayous. Our bayous offer an escape from the hustle and bustle of the city, a respite from the noise, the traffic, the pollution, and the hurriedness. They recreate along and recreational areas and bayous by strolling, taking photos, bicycling, paddling, and kayaking, even bird watching. And whether it's the 1 trillion gallons of water that our bayous moved out of our area in our city during Harvey, or expanding essential role supporting mental health, recreation, and space to social distancing, our bayous are the common thread. They connect communities, they connect habitats, and they connect all of us to ourselves. Get involved with your watershed. Go out and discover the Bayou experience. We all have a vested interest in a healthy environment. Visit bayoupreservation.org to learn more and join us.
Well, good morning. Welcome to day 2 of the 19th Annual Biopreservation Association Symposium. Our theme, the cost of doing nothing, opting for resilience. I am once again Christopher Browne. I serve as the secretary of the organization's executive committee, and it's my pleasure to moderate today's events as well as yesterday. Really great to see so many of you last evening at the symposium's first mixer. Enjoyed continuing our conversations in person, so that was really wonderful. Thank you for coming out. Same as yesterday, I'm going to start off by introducing our president and CEO, Brittani Flowers, who will start us off with some opening remarks. Good morning again, Brittani.
Good morning.
There you are.
Good morning, all. It's my honor to kick off day 2 of this virtual symposium, again, organized by our faithful Symposium Planning Committee. As the President and Chief Executive Officer for Bayou Preservation, I am pleased to introduce this year's theme, the cost of doing nothing, opting for resilience. The annual symposium is one of Bayou Preservation's primary methods for highlighting regional issues and presenting a course of action. Therefore, today, we are building a bridge between regional and state priorities, development and conservation goals, equity and advancement. This symposium offers an excellent opportunity to fully understand the linkages between targets set and action reported. As an association focused on the 22 watersheds across our region, Bayou Preservation works to highlight the importance of coordinating efforts to achieve 2 critical goals, resilience and growth. Bayou Preservation also hosts 5 regionally focused committees working to coordinate methods and take advantage of collaborative opportunities. Nonetheless, much more will be required to reduce the impact of inaction. For example, population growth and health disparities have changed the way urban planners, developers, and officials address employment, access to recreation, and how we define the culture of our collective city, the Bayou City. As an association, we are committed to creating opportunities for networking, collaboration, and advancement. Let us use the final day of this 2-day event to start turning this commitment into action. Again, I would like to thank the dedicated members of the Symposium Planning Committee and our faithful chairs and moderator, Becky Olive and Chris Browne. I would also like to send a special thank you to all of you who joined us yesterday afternoon during the after-hour mixer. I wanted environmentalists to really know how to have a good time. So thank you all for joining us. And again, I thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to learning from the many talented speakers we have with us over the next 4 hours. Chris?
Thank you, Brittani. Appreciate that. Same as yesterday, we mentioned that we have a long history, almost 20 years now, of being privileged to hear from our elected officials during the symposium. Their continued participation shows us that our mission to celebrate, protect, and restore the natural richness of all of our bayous and streams is being heard in many circles of government. So this morning, we are highlighting the City of Houston. Yesterday, Harris County, but City of Houston has been a longtime partner with us, and we'll be hearing from one of their directors shortly. But we're going to begin with some special remarks this morning. Please watch this taped welcome from City of Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner.
Hello, I'm Mayor Sylvester Turner. Welcome to the Bayou Preservation Association's 19th Annual Symposium, The Cost of Doing Nothing, Opting for Resilience. This is the second day of the 2-day virtual event. The symposium is a sought-after forum among key policymakers, planners, scientists, and engineers who value the expertise shared. The event highlights some of the leading and emerging water quality issues while discussing groundbreaking solutions. Opting for resilience is particularly relevant as we continue to build a more resilient Houston. In early 2021, Houston joined partners including New Hope Housing and Star of Hope to kick off the Urban Prairie Resilience Project to transform and restore undeveloped land into a native prairie. The project will advance Resilient Houston goals by providing additional stormwater detention, native habitat, additional trees, and carbon capture green space while providing recreation areas for families. Green infrastructure is an important stormwater management tool that can enhance real estate projects while improving drainage systems performance. Creation of both the Green Stormwater Infrastructure GSI awards and recognitions and the expedited permitting pilot programs is one step in the city's efforts to encourage green development. The city's Bayou Greenways 2020 is going strong with 150 miles of trails and 3,000 acres of green space. It is a model for other cities to see how you can transform and connect neighborhoods around Bayou systems. Houston is the most diverse city in the nation and a vision of what our country will look like in the future, a livable, walkable, green city with a quality of life second to none. You will hear from the city's Chief Resilience and Sustainability Officer, Priya Zachariah, on the Houston Climate Action Plan and Resilient Houston. These innovative efforts will forge a path towards a stronger, more resilient, and equitable city. Presenters will also show how Houston is using green infrastructure to move forward. We thank these individuals for their commitment to the conservation, preservation, restoration, and advocacy of Houston's waterways. As the Bayou City, we recognize the value of Houston's defining feature as an integral part of Houston's nature. I continue to embrace projects and initiatives that protect and promote Bayou conservation and preservation. These include the Adopted Drain Initiative, the Riparian Restoration Initiative of Houston Parks and Recreation Department, the city's Resilient Houston Plan, the city's Climate Action Plan, the city's Complete Communities. I am honored to support the Bayou Preservation Association for all you do in protecting our bayous, riparian areas, and water quality. I want to thank the presenters for sharing invaluable knowledge, ideas, and recommendations for long-term sustainability in Houston and beyond. Your efforts are necessary towards building a more resilient Houston.
Well, I think Mayor Turner may have just done my introduction for me. That was outstanding. Thank you, Mayor Turner. We appreciate him once again being able to take the time to acknowledge the Biopreservation Association, and we look forward to continuing to work with the City of Houston. Before we begin, again, let me recognize real quick our event sponsors. Our Symposiums is our organization's premier education event, and the participation of our funders allows us to continue putting on this program each year. So thank you so much to AECOM, EHRA Engineering, Tally Landscape Architects, Houston Galveston Area Council, RES, Harris County Engineering Department, Houston Public Works, Port Houston, GSI Environmental, Civil Tech, SWCA Environmental Consultants, ABHR, and Sheed Conservation Solutions. Once again, I can't thank all of these funders enough for sponsoring both this program and last evening's mixer. So our symposium topic, Opting for Resilience, same as yesterday, is meant to help us better understand resilience. The speakers yesterday introduced a variety of resilience programs, and you're going to hear more of those today, obviously. And again, I mentioned resilience is one of those words that may mean different things to different people. You saw that in all the presentations. Today, as each of the presenters talk, let's continue to note where we have overlap, where we have agreement, where we still need to find common ground, where we need to be better, and where we need to understand how we're already preparing, what else needs to be done so that we can be ready for those next major storm events. Once again, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask our speakers, you can put those in the chat and I will relay those to each of them at the end of their presentations. And we do have 2 bio breaks built into our program once again today, so you're not sitting at the computer for hours and hours on end, just an hour or 2. But that makes it's time to get going and introduce our first speaker. So back in, and the mayor mentioned this, back in 2021, he combined the Office of Resilience and the Office of Sustainability, creating now, it's called the Mayor's Office of Resilience and Sustainability. And it's led by Priya Zachariah, who is the chief of that office. It is a holistic and programmatic look at implementing the initiatives from both the Resilient Houston and the City Climate Action Plans, with a goal of reducing Houston's greenhouse gas emissions and enabling our community and systems to be more resilient. So welcome, Priya.
Good morning, Chris. I have to ask that question. Can you hear me?
I can. Welcome, and I can see you as well.
Fantastic.
And we have your presentation up. You are ready to go.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you so much. I want to start by thanking the Biopreservation Association for putting this symposium together. And of course, thank you to Mayor Turner for kicking off day 2 and sharing his message on resilience and his vision on resilience. So my presentation today is exactly about what we talked about a little while ago, you know, the overlaps, finding that common ground. How do we think about resilience and sustainability also together? And Chris, I think you took a little bit of my introduction, but you know, I'm happy to make kind of do a little bit of a repetition. So can we go to the next slide, please? So I'll start by saying, you know, what Chris had said. So this is a combined Office of Resilience and Sustainability. It is not often the traditional approach to have both resilience and sustainability in the same office. Oftentimes you will see across various municipalities in the United States, they often come from different parts of the city's administration, which was also the case in Houston till October 2021. The mayor's vision has certainly been that, you know, both of the plans have been done. We have the Resilient Houston plan on one side, and we have the Climate Action plan on the other side. Both of these documents reference each other. The work is very closely coordinated, and I feel many times a combined office plays exactly that role of being a bridge, being a convener, being a connector, and ensuring that those overlaps and that necessary coordination is addressed holistically and very intentionally. Next slide, please. So before I start going into some of the graphs, and you don't have to read all the numbers on the slide, but I'll focus on some of the bigger messages. I want to start by just laying out what I am hoping to share with you all today. There's a lot of focus on planning at the resilience level, defining resilience, defining or kind of, you know, we understand sustainability a whole lot more, I feel, because those definitions have been around since the 1980s, since the Brundtland Commission. But what I wanted to share with you all today was the work that we are doing today related to implementation. Houston is, I would feel, ahead of the curve because the plans being done. Our focus very much is on implementation. And implementation has been something that we've been looking at since 2020, but with the offices being combined, the charge that the mayor has put in front of our office is holistic, programmatic, and expedited implementation. And how do we go about that? And that I certainly wanted to educate and inform and discuss with you all that aspect of our work. So what we have in front of us really is a climate impacts assessment. I mean, we need to know what is Houston's climate risk profile. For many of us, this is a lived reality, and we need charts and graphs, but oftentimes infrastructure, funding, financing, planning, and programming do need this kind of data analysis. We know that heat is one of our major risks. We've been through a pretty brutal summer. And so we know anecdotally through personal experience that heat is going to be something that we'll have to continue to plan for and incorporate in all of our implementation efforts. For Houston, other risks are the fact that we are very close to the coast, to the Gulf. This is hurricane season. We are kind of at the tail end of it. We are seeing with utter dismay what's happening in Florida right now. So increased precipitation, more devastating and slower hurricanes, heat, and now also extreme cold is something we are thinking of. So that's on the one side in terms of climate risks. Next slide, please. So looking at both of the plans, before I get into this, let me tell you a little bit about what we mean by resilience and how the city of Houston has defined it. So what you see in front of you is greenhouse gas emissions and the city's greenhouse gas footprint. The Climate Action Plan's imperative is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and our ambition is to be a net zero city by 2050. So over and above that, we define resilience in not just as thinking about climate resilience or flood resilience, but we come from the perspective that the underlying capacity of a community is what makes them resilient to not just withstand and respond to various kinds of shocks and stressors, but to grow beyond them and ultimately transform. So in building that capacity, one is talking about community resilience, social and economic resilience. And so equity is a big part of how we define resilience. The Resilient Houston Plan is indeed that framework within which the Climate Action Plan, in a way, can be a subset. There's no right or wrong way to do it. It's how every city decides which is the best methodology and the most appropriate path for them. So if you look at this slide, for instance, again, we know that if you look at the bar chart at the bottom, the energy and transportation sectors are two of the sectors which contribute almost 50% each of the greenhouse gas emission sources. Our use of energy in our buildings, in our infrastructure, in our systems is 49%, and transportation. And if you look at the blue pie chart on the right side of the slide, you'll see that 55% of the transportation emissions come from the use of passenger vehicles, and I can almost 100% bet a lot of those are single occupancy vehicles. On the left-hand side, the green graph shows us that 60% of our energy used by sector comes from commercial and institutional buildings, and 33% from residential buildings. So in a sense, a bulk of our energy use is focused on, it comes from buildings. Not a surprise. So these energy, transportation, waste, and building optimization are the four pillars within the Climate Action Plan. And that was very much informed by this data-driven approach of having done not just the climate impacts analysis, but also a baseline greenhouse gas inventory. Next slide, please. To take a step back, I think it's really important to place this in the context of the Houston story. And I say this many times that it's very difficult or it's unfair to tell the story of Houston without talking about our growth as a city, both in terms of land area as well as population. As you can see, this slide is very self-explanatory. From the time of Houston's founding in the 1830s until today, Houston has grown substantially in land area. Population numbers are not on this graph, but on this slide, I'm happy to share them. We have about 2.3 million residents in the city of Houston. If you look at the greater Houston region, I think it's probably the 8-county region, we have about 7.1 million people, and projections tell us that if that trend of population growth, which Houston has seen very strongly, continues, we will be not just the fourth most populous city where we stand right now, but likely the third most populous city, with the greater Houston region being home to about 10 million residents by 2040. So that is a really important metric. Houston is one of the biggest and most significant economic drivers in the state of Texas on the Gulf Coast in the southern region. So that is an important point to focus on as we think about growing sustainably while we build resilience for communities and neighborhoods as part of our growth story. Next slide, please. The other thing that personally is one of my favorite things to talk about, and it really appeals to me because I'm not a native Houstonian. I came here about 11 years back. Chris, you were one of the first people I met when I moved to Houston. I was not born in the United States. And this slide really speaks to me because 1 in 4 Houstonians was indeed born outside of the US. Many of us take Houston's diversity and multiculturalism for granted, but believe me, a lot of cities don't look like this. And Houston really, for me, has that sense of, having been born and raised in India, having lived in a bunch of other places, and now living in Houston for over a decade, I really feel a sense of belonging and a sense of having come home. And that is attributed to the fact that we have 145 languages spoken in Houston. A third of Houstonians over the age of 5 speaks a language other than English at home. And if you look at, and of course, this is citywide statistics, but if you focus on some of our communities, say the Gulfton community, 2 out of 3 people in the Gulfton community are foreign born, as what we see on this slide. All this to say that along with our growth, our sense of being that home for people that come from all over, that sense of multiculturalism, within a growing metropolis, and that sense of diversity is a really important story when we talk about Houston. Next slide, please. But we also are very cognizant of the fact that we are a large city, and resource allocation and opportunity allocation is not uniform across the city for multiple reasons. And this metric is really telling because if you look at these two zip codes are probably about 2 to 5 miles apart. If you look at the difference in a metric such as life expectancy, the difference on the one hand is between almost 70 years in one zip code and 90 years on the other. So it's a yawning gap between two zip codes that are closely placed geographically. So 20 years between two zip codes. And this is an indicator of the fact that something like equity is something we have to think very intentionally about. And in that sense, when you think about the framework of Resilient Houston, where the focus really is on multiple scales, including the focus on communities, neighborhoods, and people resilience, that I think is absolutely the right approach for us as Houstonians to take. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to, I've covered this. I won't dwell too long on this, but the whole fact that, when we are thinking about growth, when we are thinking about equity, and when we're thinking about climate, we need to think about both mitigation and adaptation. A lot of the work that we are doing in terms of mitigation really is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And that is the work that has explicitly been identified in the Climate Action Plan. At the same time, the work of building resilience is something that we need to be doing simultaneously, and that is part of the Resilient Houston Plan, both of which we are looking at very closely for implementation. Next slide, please. In the next few slides, I wanted to take some time and share with the group the work that we do on a day-to-day basis. So really, what is the Resilience and Sustainability Program that we are working on? Many of you may or may not know this, but Mayor Turner is the global chair of an organization called the Resilient Cities Network, is an organization of cities led by mayors. There's a lot of mayor-to-mayor interaction, learning from peer cities, exchange of information and knowledge that happens at that level, and it's an international organization. As well as finding resources and kind of helping one another with messaging and coordination. So Mayor Turner is the global chair of the organization and also the chair of Climate Mayors. Climate Mayors is a United States-based national organization of 470 plus cities and growing. It is the definitive mayoral city organization that is focused on climate action. So Mayor Turner's leadership role in both of those fronts has put a really big spotlight on the city of Houston, not just in sense of the work that we are doing, but also the process of learning and teaching from one another in terms of municipalities and city leadership. And our office staffs Mayor Turner on both of those fronts, as well as other organizations such as C40, such as ICLEI and others. A huge thrust of our work is on plan implementation. As I had mentioned earlier, we have a number of projects underway. We are identifying new program areas. We're thinking holistically and programmatically. So, we have a number of projects and programs in the pipeline. Working on partnerships, as you will see later on in the slide, has become the fundamental way in which I think project delivery happens, especially in a world where resilience is really fundamental to what we are doing. We developed a strategic implementation work plan just to ensure that what we are doing is driven by a set of priorities, because if we try to do everything, we almost end up doing nothing. Part of what we do also is stakeholder engagement and education and outreach, similar to conversations that we're having right now, and we'll continue to keep doing this. Funding and grants, and of course, reporting and tracking as part of the CDP or the Carbon Disclosure Protocol. So reporting and tracking where we started with our baseline inventory, where we are, and how we see our actions chipping away at our greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. There's a number of projects that I put on this slide. I mean, of course, the intention is not to go through all of them in detail, but more to have to communicate the message that we are moving our program forward through multiple kinds of programs and projects. We have I'll highlight a couple. We have a program or a project called the Sunnyside Solar Farm Project. This is a landfill that is in the Sunnyside community, and it closed down even before the formation of the EPA. And through a process with one of our international partners called C40, and this is no credit to me, this is my predecessor, Laura Cottingham, and her team that did this. They went through the process of a competitive design program with C40 to identify how can we take this blighted 240 acres of land that has, historically been bringing down a community, how can we transform it so that it's a net positive? And the idea was to install a community solar farm, a commercial solar farm on this land. So project development is underway, but there's numerous elements of that project which are very community facing, including workforce training and development, including potentially some kind of an agri-hub center, community solar and battery program, and so on. We're also working with our partners, Centerpoint, to develop a master energy plan, and that is a unique and historic collaborative effort with our utility to develop a framework where we can think about power resilience, reliability, affordability from be it in the short term to in the medium and the long terms. One more thing I'll highlight is work that we're doing around neighborhood resilience. You saw the slide around the Urban Prairie project that the mayor has showed as part of his introduction, but we're also developing resilience hubs. We're working on projects that really speak to community and neighborhood resilience. Next slide, please. Program areas we're focusing on heat, weatherization. I spoke about neighborhood resilience with working with partners on land use and mobility. Energy transition is a big part of what we are doing. Green stormwater infrastructure is a big part of our program. So all of these are projects and program areas that, that we're working on currently. Next slide, please. I won't go into depth in the next couple of slides. It really is, our implementation framework. But we saw that we do have to take a programmatic approach. You can move to the next slide. Because when we look at the climate action plan and the Resilient Houston plan, we see that there are a number of 300 actions in all. 90% of those actions are owned by only 10 departments in the city. So as we do this work through partnership, we know that we have to focus on, and to be most efficient in our efforts, to focus on some key stakeholders within the city and across to ensure that these actions are being implemented, but also try to find that connection between actions. So a number of actions, as they speak to one another, we put it together into a program or a work package. It allows for better coordination and efficiency as we allocate resources in implementing. Next slide, please. And this is, I had spoken about like the fact that this needs to be a priority-driven approach. If you see, and this is a draft slide, I don't want anyone to kind of, take pictures and think that the scoring is set in stone. This is just a trial approach that we tried when we thought that, which reflects our thinking that as you prioritize, equity is something that needs to be a cross-cutting driver. Any action that can be equitably deployed in communities that are vulnerable, both socioeconomically, but also in terms of, heat islands, of flood resilience. So the equity approach is really important, as is workforce development. But we also wanted to be pragmatic and leverage on implementation momentum, which is one of our criteria, as well as, finding out where do we have that funding, potential funding pathway. Next slide, please. And what we are doing on an ongoing basis, I spoke to a number of these things. Regional coordination is something that is critical. We're working with flood control, we're working with Metro, we're working with the Buffalo Bayou Partnership, we're working with the Houston Parks Board and many other community organizations, regional organizations, to ensure that the work that we are doing is cross-cutting across jurisdictional boundaries as well as organizational boundaries. And I won't repeat the new areas of collaboration and partnership. They are self-explanatory, but just to end with the note that this work that we are doing is, I hope, and our team hopes, and all of us hope, that this is what is moving the needle forward. So together as a community, we can continue to make advances in making Houston more resilient and equitable. And I think that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Priya. It's really great to see Houston in such a prominent leadership role in the Global Climate Mayors, the Resilient Cities Network, it was called.
Yes.
Very impressive. We do have a question about the coordination between the city and Harris County's resiliency and sustainability programs. So what kind of coordination efforts are between those two entities?
Great question. These are not formalized, and we would like it to be, but we've done a lot of things, I feel, in the last 11 months since our office has been combined. But these are things we absolutely do need to formalize, and probably, going forward, that's something we need to brainstorm on how best to do it. Get the mayor's direction on how to do it. As of now, what we do is we do it very opportunistically. We have relationships across various levels, at the city, and between the city and the county, between other organizations, and we coordinate as and when there's a need. For instance, we're trying to program a set of pocket prairies, and Harris County Flood Control has been one of our supporting partners on that. And I reached out to them recently, and we'll be working with them very closely to leverage on what they are doing as well across the region to ensure that our programming addresses the right areas and has the right projects. And it's just as an example.
Excellent. I'm wondering, in the first months and first year of COVID, across the globe, we saw a reduction in vehicle travel. Did the city happen to capture any data during that time period that might, show up in reduced emissions? Your chart was talking about the reduction. So much of your presentation in the reduction of those gases and where they come from. Did we happen to capture any data in those initial months when there was kind of that? We saw there were pictures from overseas of cities that could see the mountains for the first time when because the pollution levels had dropped. Anything in Houston?
It's too early to tell yet because Chris, very well that there's a little bit of a data lag between the collection of the data and the analysis. Actually, we are going through an update right now on our reporting. So we are working with HGAC. That's another example of our regional coordination as well as with Metro to understand where our VMTs are. And it's too early to say, so I don't want to share anything prematurely, but sometime in the next few months, we'll have something more concrete to report on.
And I think there's a lot of connection in the map that you were showing in the equity of that lifespan graphic was very illuminating. But I think it has a lot of correlation to studies that I've seen about food deserts, correlations on where good public transportation is available. Do you think that there is enough emphasis on that right now where we need to focus, or is there still more refocus needed to create additional equity?
I mean, the work of equity is always ongoing, and the city has an effort, which was, again, I think it was, I'm blanking on the number, but action number 42 probably in the Resilient Houston plan to have an equity indicators, to map the equity indicators, and indeed to have an equity definition. So that work is being done by our planning department. But beyond that, we looked at all of these 300 actions to see where can we do things equitably, and looking at food deserts, looking at access to mobility, looking at barriers in educational gaps and educational attainment. All of that is part of the, these are all indicators and proxies of inequity. And a lot of the work that we are doing right now focuses on neighborhood resilience. We're working with the planning department on developing neighborhood resilience plans. And they look at all of those things, Chris, that you've mentioned. And so I think equity is very much in the center of a lot of our efforts as they're being translated to action. But I also want to add that they're community-led. What makes different communities resilient is not the same things, right? For some communities, it may be access to fresh food. In some communities, it may be access to childcare. So we want to make sure that that what we are hearing from communities is what lays out their individual or their community path towards resilience, and it's not something that we are doing at at our level. That's at kind of a higher 20,000.
All right.
Yeah,
that makes sense. But your slides or presentation clearly talks about the connectivity between all of these ideas, and I think it yet again serves as another definition of what resilient means.
right.
Well, thank you very much for your remarks this morning and your presentation. Really glad to have you here, and great to see you again.
Likewise, Chris, and congratulations on a fantastic symposium. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
So moving on to our next pair of presenters from Houston Community College, we have Dr. Kurt Ewen. He is Chief of Staff and Vice Chancellor of Strategy and Planning and Institutional Effectiveness at the Community College, and as well his co-host, Dr. Michael Edwards from Houston Community College Northeast. This is going to be an interesting presentation because we're going to be talking about building resilient organizations. I think that's kind of the prep work that needs to be done everywhere so that we can have all of these resilient programs. You got to have a good organization first. So welcome, Kurt, and welcome, Michael.
Great. Thank you, Chris, so much. And thank the association for their leadership in this area in Houston, as well as for inviting us into this conversation. We're going to move quickly so that we can leave some time for questions. I've inserted a couple slides at the beginning just to give you a sense of who we are. Houston Community College is one of the largest singularly accredited community colleges in the country. We currently serve about 81,000 students a year. Realize, of course, that pre-pandemic, that was closer to about 100,000, and we are slowly building our numbers back up. You can see our service delivery area is about 650 square miles of region here in the greater Houston area, with our students representing the diversity of our population, including international students, which you saw there. We have the largest pool of international students of any community college in the country. So lots of really great things happening at Houston. So 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago, I moved here from Florida. Actually, I'm from Central Florida, and have spent the morning on the phone with family and friends dealing with the aftermath of the storm. So I arrived in 2017. As you know, Hurricane Harvey hit us in 17. And in June, July of that year, I was tasked by the chancellor to lead the development of our next strategic plan. And Hurricane Harvey hit, followed by a global pandemic, followed by Uri, followed by on and on. And it led us to reflect very seriously about the nature of our strategic planning process. In 2007, Apple released the iPhone. Imagine leading a phone company, a phone development or hardware company in 2006, 7, and 8, having a strategic plan that was 5 or 6 years out that now you'd have to completely redo because of the earth-shattering change that brought to that industry. So we moved very quickly to think about this from the notion of strategy as learning, which basically says that we have to continually adjust, that we have to continually build the agility to move quickly and to think differently about what we're doing. And you'll see here that when you add strategy and purpose, we had no problems there, but that allowed for an inability to adapt. You see at the top. By learning this, adding this learning component, we were able to add that into our process. And what that led us to was a plan that continually corrects. So that, and as luck would have it, the plan was officially adopted by the board in December of 2019, and the pandemic was right around the corner. And trust me, we have been testing this model ever since, continually iterating, continually changing our plans as we move forward. That has led us to a resilient strategic plan entitled Embracing Houston's Future, which requires us as a community college to focus on not what we want to focus on necessarily, but to focus on what the city needs and how we can be of greatest support. And as you know, what the city needs changes regularly, very often depending upon what we're responding to. So with that, we launched one of the things that we've done to embrace the needs of the city is by embracing resilience in our programming. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to my colleague, Dr. Michael Edwards. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, thanks, Kurt. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Well, next slide, please, sir. As, of course, an attenuation of the great work, I guess, Kurt, over 2 years of building a brand new strategic plan entitled Embracing Houston's Future. After an exhaustive over 40 plus meetings with various civic, industry, and business leaders, it became clear to us that the community and individuals within those communities and various constituencies wanted something more, particularly as it related to preparing, adjusting, adapting, and managing various natural and unnatural disasters. So after several roundtable events with various business leaders, over 400 plus leading businesses and industries around the greater Houston area, and certainly with our service district area and beyond, we poll those experts, subject matter experts, and leaders. And from that, determine a variety of topics that build around the topic of resiliency and making Houston stronger, making a stronger community, and hence hopefully a stronger region. Next slide, please, sir. Transforming strength into resiliency. How do you do this? What do we really need for the next generation of first responders, as well as creating an infrastructure, but also an ecosystem for innovation that Houston really, really needs, which also helps to, as a conduit, to transform that strength into stronger individuals who can decrease the recovery time it takes to respond to some of these disasters. Next slide, please, sir.
Mike, do you want to do the video now?
Yes, sir.
All right. So this is basically to get the conversation to give you as opposed to keep you in suspense, really to tell you where we're headed, and then we'll come back and flesh it a little bit more.
Over the last several years, the greater Houston community has faced incredible challenges. In Southeast Texas, there have been 3 500-year flood events in the Houston area since 2015, each more devastating than the last. Not to mention other natural disasters, medical and weather-related emergencies. Despite the challenges the greater area has faced, Houstonians have channeled their innate spirit of strength, collaboration, and resiliency. Together, we've been able to bounce back and help those in greatest need. At HC's.
Are you able to hear that?
I apologize. We're having a little technical difficulties. Let me try that one more time.
I think we just have to switch the screen to the video playing.
Oh, sorry.
There we go. There we go. Let's start that over. Wonderful.
Over the last several years, the greater Houston community has faced incredible challenges. In Southeast Texas, there have been 3 500-year flood events in the Houston area since 2015, each more devastating than the last. not to mention other natural disasters, medical and weather-related emergencies. Despite the challenges the greater Houston area has faced, Houstonians have channeled their innate spirit of strength, collaboration, and resiliency. Together, we've been able to bounce back and help those in greatest need. At HCC, we have a long history of transforming our community's strengths into long-term, sustainable resiliency through the training of first responders. But now, we want to expand that reach to help citizens and small businesses prepare for potentially disastrous scenarios. In response to community needs and feedback, we're creating the new Resiliency Center of Excellence. Our vision? To build a stronger, more resilient Houston, where every Houstonian can possess the knowledge to prepare for, recover from, adapt, or manage hazards and disasters. Community resiliency is more than responding to major flood events. It includes disasters such as fires, spills and leaks, pandemics, and freezes. This initiative is about skill mastery of all potential disaster scenarios. HCC Centers of Excellence are existing nexuses of education and training located across the greater Houston region. Each provides education around critical elements of resiliency. This initiative will support the local economy through the development of a resilient workforce. It will connect our campuses to the resilience of citizens, neighborhoods, and businesses by serving urgent pre-disaster and risk mitigation throughout the HCC district. Our pathway to resiliency is centered around preparedness, response, recovery, and rebuilding. At the core of this important initiative is the Resiliency Operations Center. At this 65,000 square foot complex on the HCC Northeast campus, 3,000 to 4,000 first responders a year will safely train in controlled but authentic high and swift water simulations. The goal of the HCC Resiliency Operations Center is to provide opportunities for first responders along the Gulf Coast and beyond to acquire skills to conquer the deadly dangers of flooding while maintaining their own safety. But the center is not solely about rising and swift water. There will also be 2 additional first responder training facilities and programs centered around other aspects of disaster response in the highline and petrochemical industries. Electrical service is critical for our community, so it is also imperative that highline workers have a place to prepare for storm operations. The Resiliency Operations Center Highline will offer a safe, simulated work environment for exactly this type of training. Similarly, when water becomes an issue along the Gulf Coast, the petrochemical industry is affected along with the rest of us. The HCC Petrochemical Program will serve this huge industry and complement existing HCC programs already educating to fill the large and growing demand for petrochemical workers in our community. Houston needs this. Texas needs this. HCC is committed to making it happen, and we want you to join us. Are you in? Take action with us at hccs.edu/embracingresilience.
Thank you, Kurt. I hope everybody on this call is in. It is such exciting work we're doing. Next slide, please, sir. In our bold vision, of course, this is a multi-sector, multi-discipline. We have actually 14 centers of excellence in our wide footprint across 22 academic use facilities and properties across Greater Houston and Harris County into various ISDs, Alief, KD, Stafford. We're going to leverage all of that, all of our assets, to produce one of the most bold initiatives ever seen by the city of Houston. And our partner is the city of Houston. And it's good to see Priya online and others, because fundamentally, with those centers of excellence, as we leverage, indeed exploit the various subject matter expertise in various industries and subcomponents of those industries, we're going to mobilize all our efforts to produce credentials of value, short cycle efforts to not only help Houstonians be trained in some measurable level of preparedness to make a stronger community, but also give added value to not only get a job, but also secure potential careers and stackable certificates and eventually degrees. Next slide, please. Our pathway to resiliency is clear, along with the mayor's plan of a more resilient Houston, to combine our efforts in a grand partnership, along with our current partnerships with Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, hopefully future friendships and current partnerships with Centerpoint and some other various industries and longtime relations in the greater Houston area. We're going to help train 500,000 Houstonians in some measurable, appropriate degree of preparedness. And in that response, deliver a quicker response is our hope and expectation, recovery, and also efforts to rebuild, from everything to partnership in the solar farm, partnership with Highline workers being trained, partnerships to improve industrial hygiene and recovery of buildings and infrastructure that Houston needs to maintain and become a stronger community and continue to lead the region. Next slide, please. And thanks for driving, Kurt. Appreciate it.
Actually,
so our vision, a stronger, more resilient Houston, where every Houstonian possesses knowledge to prepare for, recover from, adapt to, manage in multiple hazards, including major flood events, fires, spills, leaks, pandemics, and freezes. We know what's happened over the years. We're stronger for it, but we can become a little more sophisticated and intentional in areas that really leverage the talents we have and leverage the people power that we come together and realize as Houstonians move through these various events and mishaps. Next slide, please, sir. So we anticipate the next generation of experts, next generation and current enterprise of folks being trained not only, which is my privilege as the president of Northeast College, to host a resiliency operations center, which will be the nation's first urban flood simulator. In training, further training and rescue operations for various first responders. But you see, my friends, we're also going to train the average citizen, the average Houstonian, both from a community-based organization approach through various industries where they are, where they present. And that's where those fundamental domains across project management, business continuity, industrial hygiene, the difference between duct tape and plywood, as they may say, medical triage, all of those various components, competencies, elements brought together to build a more stronger Houston, to build a stronger community, and hence a stronger region across the great state of Texas and beyond. Next slide, please, sir. That's all I have, Kurt. I gave it the best elevator pitch I could without getting too far in the weeds.
Yes. So, Chris, thank you so much for this opportunity. I've been watching the chat room and I'm not seeing a whole lot of questions. I don't know if there are any that are emerging now.
Yeah, actually, was the creation of the centers of excellence, was that something that was identified by the college and as a need to fill a hole that you observed, or was this something that you patterned after other regions or other college systems?
So that was really a move that was made under the current chancellor that we had when he first arrived. When he first arrived, the 6 physical colleges that we have were almost fully independent. And there was a lot of duplicity in those actions. And so a center of excellence basically says that if we have a welding program, the welding program is administered centrally at one location, but is there will be opportunities to study it across the district. So what it did, it consolidated leadership under one person or one area, and became a shared activity across the district. And those became vertical centers of excellence. Part of what this project does is attempts to link those. It basically says that in the work of the future, a person may be in healthcare, but that person may also need to understand other kinds of things like in information technology, in terms of how those things work to connect. The same to be true for construction. All of these areas are blending, and having a sense of how everything works together is important. We're envisioning that a lot of this work will be done for people who are already in jobs, who have a career and are needing to upskill in order to meet the new demands of their profession.
Many of those programs are adjacent to each other, if not complementary.
Yes.
The Multidisciplinary Act
Yeah.
tends to build a stronger knowledge base for content across curriculum in many areas. Added value.
When the inevitable need arrives, how quickly do you think the mobilization can occur? You have such a broad reach and so many programs as you outlined, which is really wonderful. How quickly do you think that mobilization can occur to begin to get assistance to those that need it in those instances?
So realize, of course, that we're the education provider. We're not.
Right. But you've created such a network. I mean, it's now integral, I think.
Yes. So hopefully, if the focus is on preparedness, right? Getting people prepared, that the HEBs and other broad industries in the area will have the expertise that they need in order to move forward, then we can serve as a conduit. One of the things that we discovered after Harvey was that people didn't need a degree in construction. They needed a weekend course in a Lowe's parking lot on drywall or on plumbing. And it took us a really long time to get those programs up and running, because we didn't have that agility to learn, as I mentioned at the beginning. After Uri, we were much quicker on the uptick on that. Part of that was the intentional focus that the COVID years required of us to really see what was happening and to pivot quickly. So I
think you answered exactly what I was meaning. Yeah. How do we get that education quickly to people?
Well, and not necessarily in the traditional form. So not what is comfortable to us, but what is needed by the community. Right.
Almost like an apprentice program. I always, thought that we should have more apprentice type programs, and I think that's a hole that HCC fills quite well in the way that it teaches.
And I may add, if I can brag just a little bit, we received funding from not only the state, but federal or national space in terms of support for this concept. And particularly as we go forward on the resilience curricula, recently the institution received a $2 million grant from the Department of Education to continue this work, this great body of work. In addition, for the last 2 years, we have received upwards towards $2.5 million from the state of Texas, which, as you know, is hard to reach above both sets of the aisle, right? But truly a great effort by our legislature to come together and support this idea and the concept. both from the facility perspective, where we're going to continue to train first responders, as we have for the past 3 decades, because we have a police, fire, and EMS academy, but also enhance all of that with the urban flood simulator. And then the other piece, which is the more functional piece out in the communities, where the community presents. We have training and instruction indeed to equip folks with the skills to pivot in case we have disasters, or to prepare and prevent in some areas.
So Jim asked a question in the chat, and that's a very good question, Jim. The funding is somewhat there, and let me explain. As Mike mentioned, we have about just under 5 million over the course of the last 2 cycles with the state have been funneled our way. And we have the other grant that Mike mentioned. The rising and swift water component is could cost us upwards of $30 million. And we are working with public and private entities right now to develop the kinds of partnerships and the funding for that, so that we can break ground with some speed. On the Resilience Center of Excellence is a different thing. That's a funding model that we understand very well, and it almost is a pay-as-you-go kind of thing, where the fees or the tuition that may come in for that, wherever it may come from employer, from individuals, from grants, is paid for the resources as we go. We have facilities that are underutilized as a result of student migration to more online classes as a result of the pandemic. We have lots of open space in those 22 locations that Mike was mentioning that allows us to have programming all across the district at no real upfront cost to us from a facilities perspective, as well as the centers of excellence that exist with all of the resources that are there. The biggest lift is internal, in terms of getting us to think differently about how we offer programs, not in a vertical program, but in a horizontal needs assessment of what the individual needs or the company needs as they approach us, if that makes sense.
Outstanding. Drs. Edwards, Drs. Ewen, I want to thank both of you for joining us today. This has been a really enlightening presentation. I applaud HCC for what it is doing and for your contributions, and thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, and if we're always looking for people who are interested, if there are groups or that kind of thing interested, Mike is your man, at least for now, until we get some staff underneath him on this. And we look forward to ongoing partnership. You guys do great work.
Well, thank you so much.
For more information, please go to www.hccs.edu/resilience.
/resilience. Awesome. And gentlemen, thank you for being here once again. I enjoyed having both of you. It is time for one of our bio breaks. We have, in past years, we have called, we've wondered about the pronunciation. Is it Bayou or Bayou? This one is a bio break. Get yourself another cup of coffee, stand up, stretch the limbs a little bit. But first, before we play a couple of videos from our sponsors, I'd like to once again turn on our questionnaires. Same questions as yesterday, but we may have some different participants. So if you answered yesterday, feel free to go ahead and vote again. But if not, what we're just asking you to comment on is, what do you think the most important value of our bayous are? The other question, if you were to donate about 10 hours per year towards our bayous health, what would be the most, where would you be inclined to spend that time? And then the third question, what brings you back each year to the Biopreservation Symposium? If y'all could, I see that their answers are coming in now. Got about a quarter of you already answering. Obviously on what's the most important value of our bayous, the flood protection. Habitat, wildlife, we heard a lot about that yesterday, and it's very interesting to see the tracking that's being done on Buffalo Bayou near downtown with the Buffalo Bayou Partnership, where they are tracking what kind of wildlife they're viewing. On the second question, how many, where would you donate your time if you were to spend time in the bayous? as I mentioned yesterday, our water quality efforts are year-round. Picking up trash is a year-round event. We only do the trash bash. We have participated in many years at a particular site, and we're looking to expand our reach in trash bash to provide education at more of the sites, and that is evolving right now. But year to year, that need never changes. So, well, thank you for answering those. Looks like the answers have kind of petered out. So we will go ahead and play a couple of videos from our sponsors, and we will be back with you live in just a few minutes.
As we look toward the future, our commitment to excellence continues to propel us, dedicating our established and expansive expertise to build solid, ground-down foundations today that will meet the evolving demands of tomorrow. As our population grows and land use needs change, we will continue to bring the most advanced, creative, and impactful visions to the communities we serve. We value the opportunities to support our communities and strengthen our existing relationships as we continue our mission of engineering the future.
All right. Hope you enjoyed your leg stretching. We're back with our presentations, moving on to our next presenter. I'd like to introduce Dr. Fouad Jabber, professor and extension specialist at the Biological and Agricultural Engineering Department at Texas A&M AgriLife. He is going to, this is a wonderful paragraph that was actually sent to us about his presentation. And I think I'm hopefully not stealing his thunder, but I think this is really good. Urbanization reduces infiltration and increases runoff rates and volumes. This in turn results in decreased water quality and higher risks of flooding. Traditional stormwater management have not resolved these problems. So Dr. Jabber's presentation is going to show how nature-based solutions can improve water quality, reduce runoff volumes, and he's got field studies that back all this up. So welcome, Dr. Jabber. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I am happy to be here. Can you see my screen?
I can, and we can hear you. You are ready to go.
Perfect. So first, again, it was an honor to be invited to this to give a presentation here. And I specialize. So my name is Fouad Jabber, and I specialize in nature-based solution to water quality and flood management. And I've been doing a lot of work around the state for 15 years now. And I have a lot of actually projects that I've worked on in the Houston area, even though I'm based in Dallas. So I've worked on the Exploration Green project. I've worked in the Houston Botanic Garden that designed wetlands in both these projects. I'm currently designing bioretention areas in buyout plots that the Houston Flood Control District, the Harris Flood Control District is building. So I have a lot of involvement in the Houston area. So that makes it even more exciting to be here. And so we're going to talk today about these nature-based solutions. And as Chris said, I'm going to show you a little bit of my research on these projects at lot level, and then some of the research where we took the results from the lot level and tried to apply it at larger scales, and how that impacted both water quality and flooding. So let's start with the concept. So there's clearly urbanization causes a severe change in the hydrologic cycle. On the left, you can see a natural area, and basically whenever rain falls on that natural area, water is slowed down, infiltrates, and sometimes it gets held as interception on trees and evaporates without even making it to the ground. And so a very small portion of the runoff usually ends up going as surface runoff straight to a water body. The majority of the water that goes to a water body infiltrates and travels in the soil to reach that water body. So that takes a much longer time than just water flowing on the surface. And two, by having the water move through a soil, it gets filtered, it gets reabsorbed, it changes chemical forms, and eventually the water that actually ends up in these water bodies is actually way cleaner than what was running off on the surface. Some of the water, of course, eventually goes down to groundwater. Now, when we do urbanization, even if it's like a simple quarter-acre lot, we're not talking downtown Houston, heavy impervious layers. We're talking a small house that takes maybe 30% of a lot. Even with that, we've removed the trees. We've converted, again, 30% of the lot into impervious areas that in most cases we plumb to go straight to the stormwater inlet in the street that eventually takes it at a fast rate to the stream. Even actually the grass during construction, it gets so compacted that it becomes very, very, very low infiltration. And then we come back and we put a couple of inches of topsoil on that and put turf grass, and the roots of these turf grass never really grow beyond these 2 inches because they can't go into that compacted layer. So the whole lot produces way more runoff than it used to before construction. And that runoff flows at a fast rate. As we said, it is not treated, so it's carrying with it the fertilizer, the pesticide, the organic matter from decaying turf grass, but also E. coli that comes from wildlife, from the squirrels that run around your house, and all that stuff ends up in the river untreated because stormwater systems in our MS4 locations do not get treated. Only wastewater get treated. So that is just raw, dirty stormwater that ends up in our stream. And as a result, if you have a chance to look for impaired streams of Texas, you will see that a large portion of the streams of Texas are above the environmental safe level for E. coli concentration, and they are therefore placed on a list that called the impaired stream list. TCEQ and EPA maintain that. So what is the solution? I mentioned the traditional stormwater management in my summary of the presentation. We've tried, one of the biggest approaches was these detention ponds that are very common in the Houston area because they're required. But basically, you put these huge regional detention ponds or that collect water from the area, and then you have a huge pipe at the bottom of that detention pond, and the water is slowed down. Some sedimentation happens, which is a water treatment level, but in reality, it's not slowing it down enough because you're allowing the water to flow through that pipe. So mainly it's flow control. And the main benefit of these detention ponds is peak flow reduction, more than total volume reduction and water quality improvement. So an alternative to that solution is what we call green stormwater infrastructure. Also now, more commonly, it's being called blue-green infrastructure. There's a whole, we can write a book on the changes of the name of these practices. It used to be low impact development. It was called green infrastructure, then green stormwater infrastructure, then stormwater control measures. And now we're between green stormwater infrastructure and blue-green infrastructure. And what are these? These are they're decentralized practices that fit in spaces that you're using right now. And so it does not change their uses. If you're using it for landscape, the green infrastructure can look like landscape. If you're using a parking lot to park your cars, you can put a green infrastructure as impermeable pavement to actually still park, but it actually has another function as a stormwater management system. Green roof, you have roof on all your houses, all your structures. You can put plants on those and get benefit from these systems. And rainwater harvesting, again, you're allowing water to flow from your roof. You're just putting a tank on the side of the house. So these are the practices we're going to talk about and how we're going to look at results from studies I did for these individual practices and how they had resulted in improvement in water quality and reduced runoff volume. And then we're going to look at what would happen if we use these at large scale in large areas. And so just to talk a little bit in more detail about these different practices, a rain garden or also a bioretention area. Some people differentiate between these two. We'll talk about that in a second. But basically, these are depressions that are placed wherever runoff used to go before it reaches the road or leaving a parking lot. It collects in that depression that's heavily planted. Any water that fills that depression is only going to infiltrate or evaporate. The water interacts both with the root system of the plants and the soil in the topsoil, which results in removal of a lot of different pollutants. Some of the pollutants, such as hydrocarbons, settle on the top of the soil and get broken down by solar radiation. So you have a lot of treatment happening in the system in addition to removing a percentage of the runoff volume going in. The difference between what we now more commonly call a rain garden and a bioretention is that the rain garden is something you can do in your backyard. Basically dig a depression that is 6 to 8 inches deep, put maybe an inch or two of yard waste compost in there, and then plant it with rain garden plants. We have lists online that you can look up that list all the type of vegetation, mostly native or adapted plants that can survive in very wet condition and also in dry conditions. So you can find this list and you plant that depression 6 to 8 inches with these plants, and you're in business. Runoff is going to go in, it's going to collect some volume, and it treats it. Now, if you're working in a more commercial type of location, like this is the parking lot of the AgriLife Dallas Center here, and we converted the median. Instead of having an elevated curb median, we did a depressed median, and you can see we have an opening in the curb that allows the runoff when it rains to go into this system. Now, this system is not just a depression. We actually removed 3 feet of soil and replaced it with a very high infiltration soil. So we're not only storing runoff in the depression, we're actually storing water in the soil also. So it increases the volume retention. And whenever, if we get a huge rain event that fills up the bioretention, it would overflow into that manhole that you can see right in front of the light pole. And again, planted with native and adapted plants that can survive in that system. It's commonly used in roads too. These are medians of roads. So you're not taking really an extra space. All you're doing is depressing an area, a median, rather than having it elevated and contributing to runoff. Now it's a sink for runoff as a result. So we did this study, and this was a 2.5-year study from mid 2012 to late 2015. And here's what we found. Over 2.5-year period, 50% of the runoff that went into the bioretention never left that bioretention. It stayed in it for good. So we reduced the total runoff from our parking lot by 50%, nitrate by 75%, orthophosphate, which is reactive phosphorus, it's phosphorus that pollutes the most, causes algal blooms, was reduced by around 92%. Sediments, which are our target pollutants in parking lots, because they actually carry a lot of pollutants with them. E. coli sticks to sediments, phosphorus sticks to sediments, pesticides stick to sediments. So sediment is a big target in these practices. We had also around 92-93% reduction in sediments. And finally, E. coli, which was our target pollutant for that study. We got funded because the Trinity River was polluted, was impaired for E. coli. We had a 60% reduction in total colonies of E. coli. And this is, again, the sum over a 2.5-year period. Very effective system. This is that bioretention that we did measurement on. It's different than the, it was done before the first one that I showed you was solved. We had a big 4-bay. It was collecting from a large parking lot. And then as it overflows, it goes to a detention pond from that manhole or outflow structure that you can see right here. The other practice that we did studies on is porous pavement. Again, that's it's a surface that is strong enough to hold the weight of a car to park on, but at the same time, it's porous, allowing flow to go through it. Porous pavement doesn't usually have a green part unless you're doing a grassed pavement, and I'll show you a picture of those, but usually it's pervious concrete, interlocking pavers. So the main treatment you get from these is sediment reduction. You won't get nitrogen and phosphorus reduction as a result, but you definitely get also a lot of volume reduction. And so here are different types of pervious or permeable pavement. That first picture on the top left is at our Dallas Center. These are interlocking concrete impermeable pavers. So they're like regular pavers, but they allow for a 1/4 inch space in between them when they're finally all set and stuck together. And you fill that with gravel and water infiltrates through these. Porous asphalt, it's common actually in a lot of highways in Texas. TxDOT is a big user of porous asphalt for reasons beyond stormwater management, although they do have stormwater management benefit, but also they reduce splashing, they reduce icing, so they're beneficial overall. Porous concrete, it doesn't look exactly like regular concrete because you can't smooth it on the top, but you can still park on it, and they're just allow infiltration through. I mentioned that there are grass types of permeable pavers. There's 2 types. There's a type where you can buy different, there's several companies that sell those. They're like honeycomb plastic. Some people call them waffle plastics. And basically you put them down in the soil. So the top of that plastic is exactly at the top of your soil level. And then you can put plugs of grass in them and you park on them. That plastic grid allow the weight of the car to spread rather than put force on 4 points from the car and causing erosion. That system holds it. And of course, because you have soil and grass, it infiltrates. There's another type also that is common here in Texas, is there's something called expanded shale. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. You're probably familiar with expanded clay. Shale is a more weathered clay. Basically, if you go down under a clay soil 30, 40 feet, you'll start having shale, which looks more like rock, but is easily breakable. And it's cooked actually in a kiln, and it pops, becomes very hard like rock, but it's porous. You mix it with soil, and you have permeable pavement without need for any gravel. So here are the main type of permeable pavement. We did again a study for these 2.5 years that I mentioned, and here are the results we saw from different types of permeable pavement. We had in average in the 70s reduction in volume. This is over a 2.5 year of time. Now, again, the watershed of these parking lot is just the parking lot. That's why we had a higher reduction than bioretention. While bioretention, it collects from larger areas, but still very impressive by putting permeable pavement in the parking slots. We kept the driveway regular concrete, but we sloped it toward the parking slots. So all the runoff in that parking went into these permeable spaces. And we had 70, in the 70s, somewhere 71 and 78% reduction in the non-grass systems. And we had a 93% reduction in, non-gravel, 93% reduction in the gravel pavers, and total suspended solids, again, the sediments, which was our target pollutant for parking lots because they come in cars and they carry pollutants. We had somewhere between 48 and 57% reduction. And for the grass pavers, because there's a soil and most of sediments settled, the pores of that system are a little bit smaller, so they were able to hold more sediment. 84% of the sediments over a 2.5 year period never made it through the outlet of that parking space. Here's a close-up look at the interlocking pavers. You can see how the gravel is in between and allows for infiltration. The third practice I'm going to talk about is green roofs. And again, green roofs are basically putting plants on the top of a roof. We have 4 pictures here of different types of buildings, but it also could be on overpasses. I don't know if you ever come to Dallas. In downtown Dallas, they built a park a few years ago, Clyde Warren Park, and it was a park on top of what used to be an overpass or an underpass, I guess. And so it's above a tunnel, and it's a big park with trees and grass and play equipment, and that is actually a green roof. So it works. It holds water in your soil and reduces the runoff. I'm not putting results here that we did have results that showed 70% reduction in runoff volume. Again, we couldn't look at water quality impact because the rainfall is usually very clean coming in. So what we had done is some basic research that showed that the green roof does not increase significantly pollution if designed properly on top of these buildings. But we reduced runoff, I think, in the 80% range. And the last thing practice that falls into this blue-green infrastructure is rainwater harvesting. Of course, rainwater harvesting is popular for drought control, for using water when you have restrictions in water or not wanting to use city water to irrigate your plants. But in reality, if you think about it, by putting a large tank that collects from your downspout, you're collecting all the runoff from the top of your roof during the storm so that there's no runoff coming out of your house during the storm. And then if a couple of weeks later, when you need to do irrigation, you irrigate with it without producing runoff, just letting all your plants soak in the water, you have actually removed the volume of your tank from the runoff cycle and resulted in reductions. So with that, I want to talk about one more thing, since I actually designed a couple of those in the Houston area. So constructed wetlands, we know regular wetlands are very beneficial. We've heard about them, their power in reducing the force of hurricanes and then reducing erosion. But constructed wetlands are actually practices that you can put like a rain garden in the middle of the city. You can build a wetland right next to a big building, just so that you can reduce the impact of runoff. So I've actually designed, and we have constructed 3 of these mini constructed wetland at MD Anderson, and they've been working great. They look great, and even patients come out and sit to feel better because it looks nice in addition to its property. We didn't get funding to monitor the performance of these. So, and I'll tell you what, this is how we design wetlands. The wetlands are like bathtubs. You control everything by the inlet and by the outlet, but you still have different features to allow water to pond in various ways. So whenever you have a drought, you still have wet spots that allow the vegetation as well as the wildlife to survive in these systems. But here are some literature reviews, data about pollutants, and you can see on average, wetlands are very good in removing pollutants. So with that, let's go and talk a little bit about the impact of these practices at large scale. The first study is actually in the Houston area. It's in League City. This was a contract that I had from League City, and they wanted to know green infrastructure and high density impact on runoff and water quality. So we had this property that actually is a real property that exists in League City. I think this is the limit of League City, like in the top line in the second graph is the limit of League City. So we didn't do anything in the top part, but we did stuff in the lower part. And we had assigned a number of people. I don't remember how much it was, probably 6,000 people or something like that. And we wanted to put them in a residential area. So the first design, we put them in high-rise buildings, and we were able to fit everyone in that red space, 16% of the total area. And the downstream area, we converted into an open prairie with trails in it. Then we tried the same number of people, but we used single homes with quarter-acre property. And what we found was that we needed 51% of the area in order to fit all these people in it. The third one, we used a conservational medium-density urban design. So we still used 51% of the area, but integrated in those were some spaces, green spaces in the middle. Then we ran the model with without green infrastructure and with green infrastructure. And here we can see the volume of water in the high density was the lowest without green infrastructure. There was actually 100 millimeter of runoff less than the medium density and the medium density conservational runoff amount. In nitrate, the same thing. We only had 430 kilograms of nitrate come out, while 591 and 577 in the conservational medium density systems. For phosphorus, it was a little bit closer. There was really no significant difference. It was around 430 to 450 kilograms of phosphorus. So when we put green infrastructure, we basically equated all these three systems, because there was much more space in the medium density system to put green infrastructure. And we had more or less the same amount of runoff coming out of these three types of design, a little bit more nitrogen than the others, but the difference between the total nitrogen was way less when we had green infrastructure as compared to no green infrastructure. And phosphorus actually was reduced more in the low density as compared to the high density, because actually phosphorus is contributed from both the prairie land and the impervious land. And as a result, having more space for green infrastructure worked better for these systems. The last study I want to talk about is something we finished not a long time ago. I did this study for the Nature Conservancy and the city of Dallas. And we were talking water quality and volumes up to this point. This study, we looked at flooding. So we really were concerned with the flood rate, the flow rate of runoff, and can it be reduced by these green infrastructure systems. So this is rarely done, the study. We've seen a lot of studies that look at water quality, but rarely was green infrastructure looked at as a flood resilience system. And we used the PC swim, the EPA model swim. And this is where you look. At the top, you have three maps of the city of Dallas showing the sub-watershed. These are sub-waters for each stormwater inlet where we have flooding resulting from the 2-year, the 10-year, and the 100-year storm. And you can see that for the 2-year storm, we have a few. Dark red is high flood, yellow is low flood, and gray is no flood. And you've seen a few locations flood from the 2-year, they increase in the 10-year, and then they increase a lot in the 100-year system. Then when we integrated green infrastructure and ran the model again, we saw significant reduction. Of course, in the 2-year flood, we saw a lot of reduction because really these green infrastructure were great for these first couple of inches of rainfall. For the 10-year, we still saw some significant reduction, even though we have some of these subwatersheds still flooding. And even for the 100-year, which we really didn't expect at this level, we had a reduction in the significance of the flood in a lot of locations very strongly. And some of these subwatershed completely were taken off the flood risk map. And with that, this is my name and my contact, and I can take questions.
Fouad, thank you so much. That was a good overview of green infrastructure techniques, and love the example photographs. The more we see of that, I think the more it becomes kind of regular, normal, right? What are some barriers to getting these kind of techniques more normalized? Do we need to see these like integrated into building codes locally to get builders, developers to use these kind of systems? Because a wide-ranging acceptance hasn't really happened. We've got great examples everywhere, but we need more of them, right?
Absolutely. This is a great question. I actually just finished writing a paper on barriers to green infrastructure in the United States. We have several levels, right? So we the first level of resistance is the knowledge. So when you tell someone green infrastructure, they start thinking cost, maintenance, and even the design. And they're like, we don't know how to do these things, and so we're going to skip them. So we really need to do a better job of educating. I've been trying my best for the past 15 years, but I think we need to increase this to show that actually it is simple. Maintenance is less than even a turf grass area because you have to check it maybe once every couple of months. You don't have to mow on a regular basis. You don't have to irrigate most of the time, except if you have a severe drought. The second level is, again, economics. For a long time, everybody thought that green infrastructure is way more expensive. But in our study, we showed that if you're comparing it per gallon of water reduced, it is 1/10 of changing your pipe system from a 16-inch to a 32-inch or whatever it is. So capital projects are 10 times more expensive than adding green infrastructure. And we know with climate change that we're having increased runoff, and everybody's going to look at an undersized stormwater network. Instead of going and changing all these pipes, you could start putting green infrastructure in that watershed and thus keeping your same system functional most of the time. So there is an urgency here happening, and that's going to be needed in the next 10, 15 years. And finally, as you said, we can rely, and we rely a lot on volunteer developers putting these systems in their development. But again, with the initial cost, they might not have a good incentive. So we really need to look at integrating these in ordinances and having cities be a little bit more assertive in requiring green infrastructure for new developments. Parking lot is really the low-hanging fruit. Every new parking lot should have a bioretention in its median, and that can take you a long way.
Yeah, it seems like we should abolish raised medians in parking lots because they immediately have to be irrigated so that the 1-inch caliper tree, the single tree that they plant might survive.
Right.
Well, Dr. Jabber, thank you so much for being here today. Great presentation. We really appreciate you adding to our symposium.
Thank you.
Moving on to our next speakers, another pair of speakers. We have Jason Pinchback who is Water Resources Program Manager, and Joshua Oyer, Coastal Resiliency Program Manager at the Texas General Land Office. Gentlemen, we've got both of you. I see one. And let me, now I see you both. Go ahead and unmute. And gentlemen, welcome so much to today's symposium. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate learning more about what the GLO is up to and how you're going to be assisting coastal communities.
Yes, thank you, Chris. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All
Go
right,
ahead.
you can see my full screen slide there.
Got your slides.
Okay, great. So appreciate y'all having us here today. Good morning. My name is Josh Oyer. I am the Coastal Resiliency Program Manager at the GLO. And after my presentation, you'll hear from Jason Pinchback, the Water Resources Program Manager. And just first of all, I wanted to touch on the purpose of the Texas General Land Office for those of you who might be a little less familiar. So in light of the agency mission statement there, I just want to reiterate that one of the main roles that the agency serves the state is through the management of state-owned lands, which includes leasing activities that generate revenue for the permanent school fund. And so in the coastal area, state-owned submerged lands are actually anything tidally influenced on out to roughly 10 miles into the Gulf of Mexico, where federal jurisdiction takes over. And in addition to the overall management of this coastal lands and natural resources, the GLO Coastal Protection Division houses multiple project funding and planning programs. It also operates the state's oil spill prevention and response program and has other jurisdictional permitting and regulatory authorities within the Texas coastal zone. The main purpose of my part of the presentation today is to give you information on the Texas Coastal Resiliency Master Plan, which is the GLO's state-led long-term and ongoing coastal planning effort for our state that provides a vision to protect not only our coastal communities and our habitats, but our infrastructure as well. And the plan does this by offering a range of nature-based and infrastructure improvement ideas that includes programmatic measures, non-structural, that create that multiple lines of defense approach that we hear so much about in confronting coastal hazards. And so we're currently working on the third iteration of the plan that is due in early 2023. And that's building on the work in the 2017 and 2019 plans. And we continue to aim to adapt the planning process to the changing conditions along the coast and the evolving preferences of our stakeholders. And so the 2019 plan that we're still kind of working off of, it recommends 123 specific Tier 1 projects that have been vetted as offering a boost to coastal resiliency. And then the GLO uses this list of Tier 1 projects to inform our funding priorities within the coastal division. And so by way of using some imagery here, we view this plan as an incubator, a platform, and a funnel. So the incubator, if you think about it that way, exists as we work with stakeholders on our technical advisory committee to foster collaboration and consensus building on which projects we want to promote, which ideas. And then the plan serves as a platform by communicating the value of the coast and the vulnerabilities that are confronting us, but also on the best opportunities that we need to capitalize on. And then the funnel part of that justifies and directs funding to these opportunities. And so as we dive deeper into the nuts and bolts of the Coastal Resiliency Master Plan, with it, we aim to alleviate these 8 vulnerabilities that are grouped into the categories of land change, flooding, and degraded water resources. And then moving forward from that purpose, we formulated a list of recommended wide-scale actions that encourage true resiliency project approaches to provide multiple benefit outcomes and work towards alleviating more than one vulnerability with complementary elements within the context of not only our current, but our future needs as well. And so the Tier 1 projects of the plan are then opportunities to implement these ongoing wide-scale actions. And so we continue to try to draw connections between investing and maintaining, improving our habitats and ecological function, and then how that investment can be realized as providing a boost to the prospect of community protection and then continued economic growth. So the Coastal Resiliency Master Plan, it relies on both the tenets of being highly stakeholder informed as well as data driven. And so the formulation of our plan has drawn heavily from input from our technical advisory committee, made up of more than 200 experts across the coast. Coastal experts and local decision makers are the 2 main categories that we group them into. So this is that incubator I was mentioning that helps partners envision larger scale and more collaborative ideas that serve more beneficiaries and provide a greater return on investment. So we'll continue to leverage this technical advisory committee as we assess vulnerabilities and evaluation of potential solutions in future iterations of the plan. And the technical advisory committee allows us to collect information at that grassroots level and continue to keep this process as locally driven. So through working with our technical partners at AECOM and the Hart Research Institute of Texas A&M at Corpus Christi, there are also significant data-driven aspects of our planning effort. And some of the data that's being created through this plan is modeling for future conditions to the year 2100. So as it relates to that funnel side of the image for support and funding, this facet of the planning effort is particularly useful in justifying proactive approaches for funding resiliency projects. And so the modeling framework starts with the sea level affecting marshes model, or SLAM. And that's been utilized to envision future landscape changes due to the relative sea level rise across the Texas coast. And then by processing those results through the SWAN and the AdCirc models, we can imagine the potential for increased storm surge inundation if the landscape change patterns of marsh migration and land loss and open water conversion continue forward as projected. And so we completed a modeling run in the 2019 plan, given an intermediate global sea level rise scenario of 1 meter into the year 2100. And we're now in the process of finalizing runs for the 0.5 and 1.5 meters for the 2023 plan. And then looking a bit more at the results of the landscape change analysis, and given that the theme for the symposium this year is the cost of doing nothing, this is a look at what our modeling results show if we largely continue our current course of action. And so on the left there, you can see the distribution of land cover in today's environment, and on the right, you can see the modeled 2100 environment. Obviously, we're a little too far out to really see the localized changes there, but looking at coast-wide, we see increase by 30% in open water, a decrease by 37% in beaches, even though we see an increase of 27% of estuarine and brackish wetlands. That's of course at the expense of freshwater wetlands. And then you can see the loss of undeveloped lands and developed dry lands as well. So to take a look at a local example there in the West Galveston Bay area, we see the migration of the salt and brackish marshes in the light blue inland, while all of today's existing marshes are converted to tidal flats that are represented in yellow. And then the freshwater wetlands in green are displaced by the migration of tidal marshes inland. So I don't think any of that's very hard for anyone on this call to imagine, but still something that can really inform our local planning into the future. So then after imposing the hurricane scenarios through the SWAN and AdCirc models onto the future change landscape, we process the increased inundation into the HAZUS model, where we can examine the potential economic impacts of this increase in storm surge by projecting those increased costs. And so you can just see there in the light blue and the dark blue, the increase in the inundation envelope, and then the cost in the graph. I would be happy to provide more of this information to everyone upon request, or you can find it in the plan itself. So as I mentioned, this plan assists the GLO with internal funding priorities, such as our state erosion program, the KEPRA program, that deals with about 14 million per biennium. Hopefully that's increasing soon. And then we have our coastal management program, which passes through federal grant dollars from NOAA to address resource protection enhancement, planning, data collection, and public access. And then our GOMESA funds, which hopefully some of y'all have heard of before. Those basically are funds shared by the Bureau of Offshore Energy Management. Those are offshore leasing revenues with Gulf producing states, and we use those funds at the GLO to supplement the funding of, excuse me, tier 1 projects specifically. And then there's been other opportunities with the CDBG Mitigation Fund and other external funding sources, such as the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the NERDA trustees. So you can see there, we've got a number of resiliency tools available at the GLO website. I'd also like to talk about the Living Shorelines Initiative quickly, which is another targeted effort at the GLO that is focused on bringing technical resources towards the encouragement of living shoreline idea to be used as the shoreline stabilization method of choice by local communities and private residents. And so we've got a Living Shorelines website there that you can see the URL for, comprehensive guide to design and permitting, installation, and there's a site suitability model and some case studies at that website. And so I don't want to take too much more time. I'm about to hand it over to Jason, but also just want to touch on some of the tools that we have specifically on the Coastal Resiliency Master Plan website there at glo.texas.gov/CRMP, where we've got our resiliency project design guides intended to speak to the many facets of project implementation. So please check those out, and I'll be around for questions. I'm going to hand it off to Jason, and Jason, if you can take it away.
Thank you, Josh. I wanted to check to make sure you could hear me, and also thank you for advancing the slides. Next slide,
Loud
please.
and clear. Yep.
Thank you. I will share some information today with you all about the Clean Coast Texas program and what we are doing and working with local communities. But first, I wanted to give you just a little bit of background information about how we got to where we are. And U.S. Congress passed the Protecting Coastal Waters Act back in the 90s, which told each coastal management program that you need to enhance and implement measures for controlling non-point source pollution. In Texas, that meant that we joined forces with a number of other agencies. Next slide, please. Along the Texas Coastal Zone, GLO, TCQ, and the Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board, we share management responsibilities for non-point source pollution, but we also join forces with the Railroad Commission, Texas Parks and Wildlife, TxDOT, as well as with the other operations within Railroad Commission and General Land Office. Next slide, please. Now, the Coastal Non-Point Source Control Program, it covers a number of different facets of non-point source pollution. Some of the major categories are encompassed here on the left with forestry, marinas, hydromodification, wetlands, agriculture, and urban. But if you can picture it, in essence, covers many different aspects, and there are 57 different main program areas. Next slide, please. Now, the original strategy of the state was to determine where some of the requirements could be incorporated into existing resources, but it was determined that certain resources specific to urban measures and urban non-point source management needs were not met. So we had to figure out how to establish these program resources. Now, what we're looking at here is it's just a table with some key coastal zone facts. And for those of you who are not familiar with what coastal zone is, it's basically a boundary line that encompasses all or most of the 18 counties, encompassing all the bay and estuary and Gulf Beach areas. And the total management area is around 8.8 million acres, with the total land area around 4.5. One of the key pieces of information here that's quite interesting that we found when we plotted the information in the coastal zone is the area that's actually already protected as a part of a conservation or refuge area. Next slide, please. And this slide depicts the coastal zone, and a couple of features are kind of prominent here. You see the orange and the red hatched lines around watershed boundaries. These indicate ongoing watershed-based planning efforts. And as you look up and north and east to the Houston area, you see there's quite a bit of effort. I mentioned a second ago about the protected areas, and those are highlighted in lime green. One thing you don't see on this particular map are the impervious cover percentages per county. And what's quite remarkable for the coastal zone, that actually the impervious cover numbers at large are quite small across the board for each county. Next slide, please. When developing and trying to figure out what program area focuses that we needed to generate, we conducted a lot of one-on-one and formal surveys with our stakeholders. And what you see here is a word cloud with some of the issues that were mentioned more prominently larger. And some of these include wastewater treatment, bacteria, hurricane recovery, and stormwater management. So we helped to join forces with the NOAA and EPA requirements and couple those with needs and issues associated with Texas coastal stakeholders. Next slide, please. Based on the requirements and input we received from stakeholders, we developed a menu of services that encompasses 7 main areas: stormwater retrofit and design and construction. And this is in essence reimagining what a current land use looks like, and then reimagine it in such a way, such as Dr. Jabbers, many of his techniques that he shared would all be things that we want to propagate and enhance. When I mentioned the impervious cover percentages, we think that that leaves a large opportunity for coastal communities to enhance ordinance and stormwater criteria, as well as community planning. Of course, we're also looking at water quality data and analysis and wanting to squeeze every bit of information we can from the myriad environmental data that are available. We're also partnering with coastal communities to help develop grant applications and project funding ideas and getting them to the point where they can be submitted directly for grant funding. Of course, this involves partnership development as well as education associated with our local decision makers and community officials. Next slide, please. To help us deliver these services, the General Land Offices, we developed a collaborative with 3 different institutions. This would be the Meadow Center for Water and the Environment out of Texas State University, Texas Community Watershed Partners with AgriLife Extension, as well as Texas Sea Grant. Each of these different organizations have expertise and proven experience of working in the coastal zone, and they are partnering up with us to deliver a series of technical workshops, technical expertise, and other resources needed to help deliver the buffet of services that I shared in the previous slide. Next slide, please. Some of the goals with the Clean Coast Texas program that we implemented starting about 18 months ago is to support sustainable stormwater management in the coastal zone. And it's very important to mention prominently that these are voluntary and incentive-based initiatives and are not associated with regulation or requirements. But along with this comes the ability to provide technical resources to support local decisions, to improve coordination amongst the many different organizations working in this arena, and to resolve actual ongoing and current issues. And of course, we are working together to seek and plan projects. Next slide, please. Some of the related activities that we're working on and initiatives, including focusing on the Texas Beach Watch program, which collects around 9,000 samples each year from 168 sampling stations along peak use recreation areas on the coastline. So we're examining this information to figure out what the long-term trends are to separate the good, the bad, and the ugly on our particular sites. Coupling with that analysis is we have source tracking studies to try to determine if, when, and where, which species are driving fecal pathogen loading. Of course, we're closely coordinated with Josh's program, Coastal Resiliency Master Plan, and work closely with many different coastal partners, including a prominent partner, Houston Galveston Area Council, in the particular area of interest here. For more information, you can, of course, look at our website and contact me. I'll have my contact information up in a few minutes. We're also working on a water quality messaging project, and this was in response to concerns and information provided to us by coastal stakeholders. Next slide, please. And so here's a draft of 2 signs that will be going out at local jurisdictional area parks and other areas of interest. And we'll also have 3 short videos that will accompany the signage, as well as some QR codes linking folks to additional information to figure out, so they can figure out how to gain additional resources. Next slide, please. I'd like to thank the Bayou Preservation Association and the other attendees and presenters. I've learned a lot. It's great to be coupled with the resiliency specialist, and Dr. Jabber's information was fantastic. I definitely want to reach back around and see if he'll join us for one of our monthly lunch and learn sessions that we host through Clean Coast Texas at the General Land Office. Thank you so much.
Joshua, Jason, thank you so much. We've got a question about the obvious, we hear it, considering sea level rise. The coastal zone, does it need to shift inland to get ahead of the potential of sea level rise? The question mentions that there's funding sources available for the coastal management plan that are limited only to the coastal zone. Is that something that needs to be reestablished because of, in essence, changing the edge of our maps?
That's a great question. I'm not sure if we have the ability to answer that here. I'm not aware of any specific discussions ongoing right now regarding the shifting of the coastal zone boundary. However, we have talked with project applicants and proponents who are potentially submitting applications and interested in projects that will allow for the slow movement or migration of different land uses based on the pressures provided both from sea level rise as well as tropical storms.
Joshua, you were starting to answer that as well. Anything to add there?
No, I think Jason had a great answer for that. I think there are also some applications where the coastal management program funds can be used outside the coastal zone, but not very far, but specifically related to watershed based improvement projects, restoration, things like that. So that's just another important point. But yeah, like Jason said, not aware of any ongoing conversations to potentially move that coastal zone inland.
So I assume that these conditions are similar across the Gulf Coast. Are there other states that we can use for examples? Just as with Dr. Jabber's presentation, the low impact or green infrastructure examples are out there for us to touch and feel and see and replicate, do even better. Do any of our neighbors have a leg up on us, or is what the GLO doing really, spearheading efforts?
Well, some of our neighboring states are doing some fantastic work, but we really don't necessarily need to look at these other states to kind of figure out some of the practices and different planning techniques that are used, as we can look to some of our neighboring cities who are pretty aggressively addressing stormwater management and water quality issues. But we are actually looking and learning from our Gulf neighboring states to assess how they've already been impacted by sea level rise and water quality impacts, such as the Miami-Dade area in Florida, where they've been dealing with some of these issues for quite some time. And so we've been learning a lot from the publications and also interacting directly with their staff so that we can better understand how some of our issues may or may not be mimicking what they're doing, and try to gain from their lessons learned and try to advance our understanding here of what's going on the Texas coast.
Right, okay.
Once again, Jason had a great answer for that. I will just add that the Louisiana's coastal master plan is a great example of doing some really robust data-driven type of work to address some of the issues they're having. Of course, in Texas, we have a very different system along the coast than a lot of our other Gulf states. And we continue to learn from those other states through the Gulf of Mexico Alliance. We're involved in many different subgroups of the Gulf of Mexico Alliance. And I serve as the state lead for the Resiliency priority issue team. And so it's always great to get together with the other states and hear about, their programs and then try to, take some lessons learned and also share some of our own lessons.
And then finally, have you seen much understanding from the public and from government officials, not your agency, but other portions of the Texas government, that the concept of these breaks at the coastline is reducing the power of storms as they hit our shore? Is that a general understanding, or is there more education that needs to be done to illustrate the need for these coastal wetlands, the importance of them, for storm protection, for water quality?
Chris, the answer is absolutely yes. A significant amount of outreach and engagement with decision makers is needed. And some folks think that, because you go to a community once or twice or 3 or even 4 times is sufficient. But, with the carousel of both staff and elected officials, it's important to keep on engaging these different officials and decision makers to level the knowledge and playing field. But often this type of process and understanding where, for instance, as you mentioned, the wave breaks or enhancing wetlands to help manage storm surge, often those are projects that take multiple years to develop, to understand, and then to even kind of, I guess it would be close the knowledge gap, if you will, to figure out where these should be implemented. And so often where we might have researchers that have a lot of information, translating that down to project level information at a piece of tract of land or a specific area often takes quite a bit of effort. And there's numerous challenges in that process.
Yeah, I'll just add to that it seems that the realization of the value of these natural systems for, mitigating hazards and human health issues, it seems that is something being brought into the mainstream and the dialogue a lot more among our elected officials. So it's encouraging to see that. And we have a lot of partners that press forward, work with the GLO funding and our leasing process to accomplish some great projects. And we just are so lucky to have some great partners. We continue to try to open these conversations with some other municipalities that we don't see as having a history of this type of activity. And like Jason said, it's all about relationships. We continue to nurture those relationships and try to keep this conversation moving forward, an inch at a time.
Right, inch by inch.
And Chris, if I could just add, the Clean Coast Texas program is currently seeking partnerships and collaborators with local communities, NGOs, and planning organizations. So please feel free to contact me if you think there might even be some level of interest, or connect me with the person you think would be interested in partnering with Clean Coast on helping and assisting in managing their stormwater and non-point source pollution.
Absolutely, we will do so. And this symposium is about making connections in many ways, and glad that y'all want to make a connection with Dr. Jabber, and glad to have you here today.
Thank you, Chris. We're glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you for inviting the General Land Office. This has been a great program. Thank you.
Appreciate that. So moving on, our next presenter is Sungmin Lee. She's the program manager for Data Analytics and Research Department at Houston Galveston Area Council. The presentation is going to introduce 3 interactive applications that allow users to quickly assess the potential and impact of future events, such as natural disasters or new developments on the environment and the demographics, including our vulnerable populations. This ecological GIS tool allows users to measure their impact on ecological resources, and it also includes local flood information. Sungmin.
Hey, Chris, how are you?
I'm very well. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Can you hear me?
Been a little while.
Yeah. All right. Can you see my screen?
I can, and I can see you and hear you. You're all good to go.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending. I hope you're finding useful information from my presentation. My name is Sungmin Lee. I'm a manager of data visualization at the Houston Galveston Area Council. The data visualization group is a part of a new department, data analytics and research. Our group's mainly responsible for developing and maintaining intellectual tools and dashboard. We also do the advanced data analytics, including the object detection using machine learning. It's a cool word, right? Developing scenario planning tool. Today, I would like to introduce 3 interactive applications that allow users to quickly assess the potential impacts of natural disasters or some kind of roadway construction on environment and population. Before getting to demonstrate application, I would like to introduce HES interactive web application page. There are about 50 interactive applications with 8 key planning areas. You can directly type and then open the page with typing datalab.h-gs.com, or you can go to the HES web page and then GIS imagery online mapping tool, click it, and then interactive web application. Then you can see the page. There has a category, so you can see the transportation-related application or environmental application. You can find that information. All right, let's start with the ecological GIS tool first. Ecological GIS tools is outline the regional critical ecological resource in the relation to the transportation planning. A user can identify the ecological resource as well as plant developments, land use, and the vulnerable population, and understanding its potential environmental or quality of life impacts. Let's go to ecological tool. Then when you open the application, you can see the disclaimer there has a link for the user guide. You click it. You can learn each function of application is step by step. Let's click OK. Also, you can have some guide, kind of a quick guide. You can see where is the menus here, what kind of menus meaning. You can find it through this one, or you can skip it. Okay, before getting to the, I think it's detail, I would like to explain a little bit about ecological layer. Ecological layer was developed by HES staffs under the guidance of HES Ecological Advisory Committee. Based on the recommendation from the committee, HES staffs identify 7 different ecological land types. Naming of these land types was selected and representing a generalized natural nature of the various ecotypes, and to have a consistent with the previous versions we developed in 2010. Furthermore, we also do the non-ecological land types were including into the final data set to display other surrounding land type, including various development land. Let's back to ecological tool. And then I'd like to share showing all the wizard in the works, but I think it's due to the time constraint. I'm only going to show you the main 2 examples. At first, finding historical the wildlife parameters, and then measures the impacts on the ecological land types. Open the add data with it. Okay, and then you can search the all kind of GIS open layer through from ArcGIS Online here. Okay, I'm looking for historical wildfires. Then here is a bunch of historical wildfire related information, and I would like have some version. Okay, I needed some consolidate one. So give me yeah, here I'm added. Then showing all the previous wildfire in US layer. There is a big one here. Is a kind of a part of the Waller County and part of the Montgomery County. Let's click it. This is happened 2011, the Rayleigh Lode wildfire. So there you can see as a 3 dot, we call there is a more option button. You click it, there has a more available option. So one is the set location. You click it, then that is automatically generate of open hours location widget to the identify of ecological types information. So that the wildfire parameter actually not complete within the area. There some portion is missing the outside of data set, but that's okay. That's a little waiting time. I think it's there has some slight issue. Let's try again. Oh yeah, it's a, web application is good. There is a demonstration also problem, but you have to reload it. You will have no problem with it. Okay, let's skip and then try to again. Wildfire, and then let's do here again, and then click here. Once again, 0 location. Yes, it's finally come out. So first one is ecotype. So based on the selected area, that wildfire affected total 18,000 acres in area. And then there is a 15,000 acres is ecotype. And then 13,000 is upper forest. And then 1,000 kind of acre is a bottomland forest. And then 112 acres Peril. And then 900, almost 1,000 acre is wild wetland area. You also can see as a percentage wise, here is the 83% of total land is ecotypes, and then 71% in upper forest, and then 5% is wetland. You also can check that the land use, what is the current land use, and then what is the future land use. You also see as based on the traffic announced zone level of the population, household and job in today and 2045. Let's close it. Let's move it. Then let's look at the roadway projects. Here is a layer list. You turn off this one. Let's turn on the HGAC 2045 RTP projects. RTP is a regional transportation project. It's a list of the future transportation improvement. Let's check it. Okay, let's uncheck the ecological tool, land cover. Here is all the projects. Let's zoom in of the part of the southwest of the Fort Wayne County. I would like to change this one to the aerial image. Let's here. You can zoom in and then click it, whatever segment. Wish doesn't have this issue again, but selection a little bit take time. Say unchecked again, check again. Yeah, it's okay. You can click here, so we can location visit, and then you also start off and draw the boundary based on location. So this is a little bypass, but you can draw the boundary here. So this segment is Grand Parkway segment C, proposal alignment. So in this case, you need to create a buffer. Let's create a 1 mile buffer. Then let's see the ecotype again. There has 12,000 total acres. 11 is ecotypes 8 years. And then this one is different. Is bottomland forest is 5,000 acres, and the upper end forest is only 600. And then a lot of grassland, 4,000 acres grassland. This is you can also see other ecotypes over percentage. 92% is ecotype 8 year, 40% is bottomland, and 34% is grassland. All right. Let's do the another analysis. Okay, I hope this one is back to again. Yeah, it works. So, okay, you more button and then open red flag report. And then let's put on the 1 mile buffer. Okay, during the red flags report running, I would like to explain this tool. This tool identifies potential red flag issue before the detailed construction plan is developed. It used a similar indicator for the National Environmental Policy Act, is NEPA. Okay, they give us some result, not fully. Yeah, but yeah, such as, okay, here is. There has I think it's 25 as pipeline related within the buffer area. And then that one, the management land is owned by governments. And then there is a walls, 51 walls. There has oil walls and then some gas oil wall be there. And then you can see as there has a 2 facility, MPDS facility. MPDS National the Pollutant Discharge Elimination System from the EPA. This is a permit for the water quality things. And then rivers, streams, there are 3. And the flood plan is important. Here is a portion of the 100-year flood plan. Here is a portion is the floodway. You also can create a report is as a PDF. Click this printer icon and then you select it of type of a paper. Here is a report. You can print out as a kind of PDF document. Let's moving on to our regional flood information. The regional flood information is an interactive GIS tool that provided information on their communities and population at risk of the potential flooding and hazards. It consolidates data from the various federal and the local agency relevant to the recent flooding event, including the Hurricane Harvey in the HS 13 County region. Okay, let's go to the regional flood information. You can see that interface of the regional flood information is very similar as ecological tool. Let's do the same thing to the added data here. And in this case, I would like using the Hurricane Ike. There is a lot of information related to Hurricane Ike, but I think I need a path here. So here is a path of the Hurricane Ike. So let's select one of our segments. It could be related with our 13th county. And so again, the more option button, click here and then set the location. The hurricane effect area will be vary by kind of a category, right? And the storm surge, inland flooding can be also another big issue as well, the damage along the hurricane path. But however, this analysis is more focused on the path. And then I think I'm using the 5-mile buffer of this analysis. Let's do it. Okay, let's open the instinct impact analysis. So this is a instinct impact analysis. There is a 277,000 population in 2020. This is coming from census. And then this is the little less of the household population, and 100,000 of the housing unit, and 84,000 in household in 2020. There has 84,000 jobs, and then almost 9,000 of the business along the buffer area, inside the buffer area. You also check the critical facility location of this based on the analysis. There is 999 of the critical facility, 82 is public safety security related, the 357 transportation, 75 is utility. You also can download it of the what is the individual kind of a critical facility related. Here is names of the facility and then address and location. And then there is also, you can do the building footprint, meaning is the number of the buildings. There's 94,000 of building is there along the buffer area. And then you also check the vulnerable population. So 37,000 population in poverty is related with that area, and then 98 historic minority, 1,000 historic minority population, 37,000 non-Hispanic minority, 14,000 limited English fluency, also 24,000 the household with disability, and then 11,000 the elderly population, age more than 70 plus, and then almost 4,000 is a no car household, and then single family household with children is a 7,000, almost 8,000 people. You also checked it low moderate income area, and then you can see the damage assessment during the Harvey. All right, okay. You close it, this one. I would like to see as another, I'd like to share with you another one. It's called the storm surge information. So the National Hurricane Center has a model that other kind of a potential storm surge. But in this case, you need to be passed more or incorporate. This is a modeling. So this is a one kind of category 1 case of storm surge. This is a category 2, category 3, and then category 4 and 5. So based on that location pathway, and then you can actually do the location analysis and then to get the summary information. Also, as you know that Hurricane Ewen passing through the Florida today morning, so you actually can check the live kind of information from here. So this is a live modeling information. You also can see what is a flooding storm surge areas, and then how much is impacted of the area. We can find the live modeling there here. Okay, let's moving to the final one. Regional Equity Tool. Regional Equity Tool is a collection of interactive mapping application that identify distribution of the vulnerable population, lower to moderate income population, and then some location information of the historical settlement. The tool also lists of HGAC and other local agency current and future planning projects. A regional planner can utilize these tools to better understanding of the social demographic and community characteristics of the given study project area and enhance their decision-making process. Okay, let's go to the regional equity tool. Here is an introduction. What is the regional equity tools and what kind of data we have it? This is some kind of a description about the individual tabs. Let's first see that the first one. Regional equity profile is the summary of the vulnerable populations, and by county, you also can see the as a city and then kind of a census block group level. In case of city, you search by here. Let's see, city of Houston's. You select it, then all the information is changed based on the selection. A little delay, but yeah, it will change it. Yeah, finally. Also, here is a vulnerable population density is a healthy user to identify high concentrate of the vulnerable population in terms of a current distribution of a historical trend. So here is a poverty, you can see the elderly, and then some of the population with no car, you can see as a something very concentrate in the within that transit area. And also you also can see as a trend, such as here, which area is increasing, which is a decrease it. You also change to see that information too. Equity Advanced tool is the same as ecological and the regional flood information. It helps the user to analyzing the vulnerable population based on the current customs boundary. The layer currently show here, this is a vulnerable population index. This is a composite index. 0 is low, 100 is maximum. So it's coming from the 8 kind of a population segments, including what you mentioned again, the poverty, minority, limit English, and then a family with disability, elderly, cottage, and a single family household. And then more information would like to know about the layer, you can visit here. And then there has definitely we have a user guide, and then some of the previous presentation. And then we have a vulnerable population index here. You can see as a methodology, what is the detail about information. Here is my contact information. Thank you. This is all my presentation. Thank you. Eva, do you have any questions?
Yes, great, Sungmin. Thank you so much. We did have a question initially about some of the abbreviations and
definitely.
I guess those of us that are in the industry, we sometimes forget that not everyone knows all the acronyms and abbreviations. Do the user manuals kind of go into that? I think I just saw it because there was a question also about low to moderate income, and I think I just saw a video that talked about LMI.
Yes, yes, we have it here, such as here. There's more information. This is what is kind of heard about the low moderate income about the, even though they're including video. So you can click it, you can find the detailed information.
So inside of your all of these tabs and tools, you can probably find abbreviation, what the abbreviations mean, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, the tool has grown so much since its introduction, and it was huge when it was introduced, but y'all are continually upgrading this.
That's true. Yeah.
How many are on your GIS team at HGAC?
I think it's our department. It's right now is kind of consolidate the older GIS ports together. We have almost 20 people, but I think some of them as a travel demand modeler. So it kind of combined as more than, I think, close to 20 people as our GIS workforce we have.
And knowing a little bit about how the GIS layering works from our own team here where I work, a lot of links, we link a lot of our data, but those links sometimes break. Are y'all constantly looking for broken links, or do you house most of your data on site so that when people are using the tools, they don't get those?
So same way we do it, that one is we have a house on site. That is a kind of a main kind of, we are kind of a generated. Definitely we try to on-site it. We have our own server. That's why sometimes it doesn't work. Then meaning is we maybe check with the servers outside. And then also a lot of information these days is go to the ArcGIS online. So that is more secure to me, is more safer. You may be losing that broken link. And then another one is other agency generate information, such as our regional flood information. This is a kind of connecting to the all different agency, even federal agency, national highway, the weather center, seeing information. So then we need to be during that the checkup time, we see as something they change, and then we are kind of alter to find a new source. Things like that is need to be, because it's not we are kind of maintain of data set. However, a lot of see, as you said, kind of storm surge information. This is real-time data, right? Today morning, the hurricane passing to the area, but that is real-time modeling come out. So that we cannot this if not available, disconnect does not work, because it's very useful information for any planning activity.
Right. Final question here. Commenter says, first of all, this is great, and I totally agree. Let's see. It says, talk about this. Talk about if the summaries in the regional equity tool adjust for differences between geographic boundaries. For instance, the city boundaries do not necessarily follow census block group boundaries. When you do your tools and you're selecting those areas, how do those boundaries differentiate between those?
So this is a census. We are not aggregated. This one is actually directly from the census. So kind of a city boundary, kind of city of Houston. I know city Houston boundary very kind of problem, right? But what is it actually census working that they not only geographically, they also this is a kind of a city's number. We only have a number from that specific city's kind of a number. So we not do some kind of another analysis or spatial analysis just for the specific kind of a small portion of the land. This is coming from census number. So the whole number is coming from census.
I see. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I want to compliment on is the way that the data comes out. The widgets that y'all have created or use are producing some wonderful graphics. It really easily digests some very complicated data, and GIS is a wonderful tool. Very glad that you and HJC have invested so much into this, and I hope that everyone heads. You can do just a search for HJC GIS and find the page that has all of their GIS applications. Really great work. Thank you, Sungmin, for being here today and for showing off your great software once again.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
So we're going to move to our final break of the morning, getting ready for our grand finale. Once again, we've got some poll questions. The first one, very important to us. We would really like to understand how you would like to see the symposium in future years. We've pivoted, obviously, to this virtual in the last 2 years. But this has historically been an in-person event. So we'd like to know how you would like to see us proceed with the event in the future, what kind of speakers you would like to see in future years, and obviously what kind of topics as well. And so if everyone can just take a second and go ahead and participate in the poll. We will, like I say, take this last bio break, get up, stand up, grab yourself another drink or a snack, and we will be back in just a few more minutes after watching our sponsor videos one last time. Again, really appreciate all of our sponsors making this and yesterday possible, as well as our mixer yesterday. Very similar results from yesterday. We will have to investigate what a hybrid symposium might look like. Obviously, technology has made that much easier. So hopefully we can figure out how we might be able to do that ourselves. Good. Yeah, more green infrastructure. Yeah, I think we were all inspired by what we saw in today's presentation. Excellent. We thank you for those poll results. And like I said, we will take this one last break and be back with you in just a few minutes.
As we look toward the future, our commitment to excellence continues to propel us, dedicating our established and expansive expertise to build solid, ground-down foundations today that will meet the evolving demands of tomorrow. As our population grows and land use needs change, we will continue to bring the most advanced, creative, and impactful visions to the communities we serve. We value the opportunities to support our communities and strengthen our existing relationships as we continue our mission of engineering the future.
All right, welcome back, everyone, for our final presentations. I just want to mention one of the things about going virtual is the sometimes lag in internet. You've seen that on some of the presentations, and I just want to know that, or let everyone know that the final video in our sponsor presentations was by RES, Resource Environmental Solutions, and we thank them for being a sponsor. And if your video was glitching as mine was, you may not have seen their logo at the end. But once again, thank you to RES for being a sponsor of this and previous symposiums. So our next presenter is Jacqueline Patterson, who is founder and executive director of the Chisholm Legacy Project. This one's going to be a little bit different. We're going to do this in a Q&A format, and we're going to be talking about the ups and downs of resilience building and the impact that it has on communities. So I'd like to welcome Jacqueline.
Thank you. How are you? Can you hear me okay?
There you are. Yes, I can hear you just fine. Good to see you.
Thank you so much. Good to see you as well. So does this mean you didn't want me to do the slides, or?
Oh, you can do your slides, absolutely. I was just, you had given us some questions and indicated that you would like to kind of do it as a Q&A, but I think first, why don't we let you, if you have some slides, and then describe to everyone what the Chisholm Legacy Project is. We'd all be very interested in understanding exactly what you're up to.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So the Chisholm Legacy Project is a resource hub for Black frontline climate justice leadership. And it is a project that really works with communities across the country to build capacity around, as we say, frontline leadership on and environmental climate justice, from the climate mitigation side, the climate adaptation side, and seeing all of these matters as intersectional, which is what I had, which I'll talk more about in my actual presentation. So, yeah.
Well, go ahead with your slides. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. So let's see here. Let's make sure. Okay, good. That's from the beginning, and share slides. All right. So from slideshow. Okay, so I think I'm given the situation, I won't show the video I plan to show. Can you? Okay, good. It was a brief video that was in context, but I'll keep it a little bit briefer and be kind of briefer overall, because we were expecting more of a Q&A. But so as the title says, it's Peril and Promise in Resilience Building, recognizing that there is hope, that there is promise if we really do resilience building in a certain way. So when I first started doing work around adaptation, it was a part of a couple of adaptation working groups. I was concerned because at first I was new to the space, and right away, I just saw that so much of the conversation around adaptation and even the notion of resilience was around physical infrastructure type of intervention, so to speak. And I thought, with the communities that I am engaged in, communities that are experiencing fairly high intensity struggles and contexts, that the infrastructure was not going to be enough to say that a community is actually resilient to the shocks of climate change or the other kind of intersectional shocks. And so there's a quote from Audre Lorde: "There is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives." And so when we think about resilience, we have to think about it in the context of the intersectional identities and conditions that form our lives and the lives of community. And in certain communities, these various attributes and characteristics have a greater impact than others on whether someone is actually resilient. And so this is where I started to say, okay, we need to be thinking about this in a different way, a more nuanced way, that yes, infrastructure and looking at social constructs, looking at systems, looking at our economic system, looking at our legislative regulatory system, thinking about how decisions are made, how communities are designed in the first place, and so forth. And so this is a little video I would have shown you. I'll make sure you get the link afterwards, but it's called Unequal Opportunity Race. And it really talks about how these various characteristics of our lives impact our ability to actually move forward. And so at the conclusion of that kind of time period where I was involved in these adaptation groups and seeing the lack, I decided to write this document in 2015, Equity in Building Resilience and Adaptation Planning. And in it, I started to lay out, like, let's look beyond, again, the physical infrastructure, and let's think about some of these issues that are both vulnerabilities and assets in terms of those very same characteristics that were on the intersectional slide. But in our society, what should be an asset or just merely a characteristic can become a vulnerability when we have a society that's built on this extractive economy, and where there are so many forms of oppression, depending on your race, depending on your class, depending on your gender, depending on all of your nation of origin, and so forth and so on. So we need to be looking at these various attributes to really think about how do we build resilient systems. And so both in terms of attributes of people, attributes of communities, attributes of what's available to people. And then really when we look at outcomes to establish whether we have achieved resilience, then we have to be looking also deeper as well. So looking at these types of outcomes, not just whether we have the system in place, but who was served by the system and how and what their lives were like, or what their lives will be like after we implement various measures of resilience. And so when we think about even applying, like even if we put in a seawall, when you have a community that is in a deeper state in terms of a floodplain, as an example, like you might put in a seawall that's supposed to protect a community, and there's some parts of the community that have more flood vulnerability than other parts of the community. But if you just put in the seawall, then everyone is going to get the same level of protection, even though they don't have the same level of vulnerability. And so this is why when we talk about this notion of equality, equity, and liberation, and really how are we thinking about that in terms of how we adjust our systems so that all are well, all are resilient. And so I don't want to kind of go on and on about the negative. So I want to really talk about some of the folks who are doing this work, who are actually rising above and creating resilient systems in their localities. And so I'm in Boston right now, and have always been inspired by their resilience strategy that is rooted in racial equity. They recognize the historical underpinnings of racism, and they recognize that in order to build racial equity, we have to have certain systemic interventions. And Boston being a multiracial organization, multiracial city, not just multiracial, but also multi-ethnic and multi-countries of origin, and its rich diversity. So for them to center race and racial equality in their resilience plan is critical to actually achieving, as they say, effective, inclusive democracy for all Bostonians. This is a project called the Kepra Institute, which is in Indianapolis, and Indianapolis, it's racially diverse, lots of African Americans there. It also has, it's an urban area with kind of all the beauty of the cultural richness and the blight that often happens in too many urban areas due to disinvestment. So they really came together, and they developed a multi-generational project that was rooted in Black culture, rooted in youth leadership and decision-making. And they're doing everything from job creation to aquaponics to clean energy and more to ensure that they actually have a community that uplifts the well-being and leadership of all. Again, a little video I would have shown you, but I'll make sure you all have the links afterwards so you can check these out. Similarly, the Cultural Arts Coalition in Gainesville, Florida, a place where they are beset upon with these disasters that are often coming out through Florida. That Gainesville is also an urban area with, again, its beauty and bounty. And the Cultural Arts Coalition was intentionally put together to do everything from political education to climate science education to cultural celebration and rooting their work in culture. It's again a great intergenerational project with awesome youth leadership and adult leadership, looking at doing local food work, doing clean energy work, doing work around stormwater management, recognizing that again, for the community to be whole and resilient, they have to look at all the different aspects of community, both in terms of uplifting the assets and also addressing very explicitly the myriad vulnerabilities. Because if you just address one vulnerability, then the other vulnerabilities still exist, and you can't really say that you're actually a resilient community unless you really have approaches that are multi-solving, as we say, that are addressing all. On the Chicago South Side, where I was born and raised, I was excited to go back there a couple weeks ago to participate with the Blacks in Green work, where they again are rooting their work in cultural in Black culture on the South Side of Chicago, an area where there's a strong you hear, unfortunately, about every year the record is broken from the last year in terms of gun violence and challenges and so forth, yet they are providing economic opportunities for the same youth that might be able to go down a different path with these opportunities that are being provided. Because unfortunately, being from the very area where they are, I know that there are too few opportunities, too far to go to get a decent living wage job, too far to go to get a quinoa or kale or spinach versus taquitos or Doritos or Fritos. So they recognize all of this and put together a beautifully culturally rooted program that includes, again, everything from stormwater management. They just had a pretty significant flooding incident, and so they're working on stormwater management, to local food projects, to clean energy projects, to programs that create jobs and financial resiliency as well. Similarly, in Buffalo, New York, Push Buffalo, which is a housing project originally, but again, comprehensive efforts to, again, for job creation, for housing stability, recognizing that housing and shelter is so critical to financial security, and having housing that is sustainable in terms of electrification, in terms of energy sources. They do solar energy sources. They provide economic opportunities for low-income community members, for youth that, again, may have gone a different way if it weren't for these opportunities, in a multiracial, multi-generational model for, as they say, a new neighborhood economy. This is a group that I was excited to be a part of from its very inception. Is ECHO, which is based in Gulfport, Mississippi. And it grew out of the work and leadership of some of the NAACP leaders there, past presidents of the Gulfport NAACP branch, Kathy Eglin and Ruth Story, and has grown to an organization with multiple folks, faith leaders, community leaders, others. And again, they have done everything from train their emergency management folks on how to do both trauma-informed and culturally appropriate response to disasters. They've done that with first responder training. They've done multiple faith leaders trainings to help faith leaders to be able to center equity and resilience in their work. They've done work on coastal preservation and restoration, really pushing back on the ward development that would actually be developed on wetlands, and push back on road development that would also be impacting the wetlands. And they've gone from the State House to going to the Public Utilities Commission's meeting, which I think they're actually doing this week, maybe even today, to push back on some of the wrong ways that energy development is happening. They really see the comprehensive, multifaceted ways that we need to engage around energy equity, around food justice. Oh, that's the other thing they did, was to develop a multi-site a network of community gardens, because some of the areas were considered to be food insecure. They don't like the people on the front lines don't like the term food desert because deserts are something that occur naturally. And they know that the history of redlining, the history of disinvestment, the history of explicit and intentional disenfranchisement of communities is why some of the communities are food insecure. So they prefer to use other terms than desert. The last example I'll give is a community that I'm actually going to next, Dallas, Texas, Sand Branch, where they haven't had running water since the mid 80s. They and they have historically had challenges around, they're in unincorporated community. There were former freedmen settlements. It was started by 11 people who were emancipated from enslavement from Louisiana who came to Texas and found this land and purchased the plots of land and settled there. But they, like so many other freedmen settlements, were intentionally disenfranchised, not incorporated, not having basic services that municipality, being a part of municipality would allow. And so therefore their water system fell into disrepair, and they don't have, which was a well water system. And so they haven't had running water, as I said, since mid 80s. They don't have trash pickup. So they rely on donated bottles of 16.9 ounce bottles of water, cases and cases, for their cooking, cleaning, clothes washing, just drinking water, all the things that we use water for, because they don't have running water at all. And so they have, but now as we talk about resilience building there, after many broken promises and being really shy and distrustful of other folks working in the communities, we've reached a point where where they have started to gain trust through the work that we've been able to do there. And now Sand Branch is rising. They've developed a Sand Branch Revitalization Fund. They're getting hydro panels for all their homes to do atmospheric water generation of water. They are now engaging around, they were declared to be a 1% floodplain by FEMA. So then there was a prohibition on home improvements. And also then they were subject to this FEMA buyout program where the buyout was happening, but their home values were assessed so low because of no trash pickup, no running water, and so forth, that the property value appraisal was low. And then on top of it all, for the FEMA buyout program, they subtract the amount it would take to demolish the home. So they gave people checks for $350 for homes and properties that had been in their family for generations and generations. But again, Sand Branch is rising. They're building resilience. They're recognizing the value of land security. They're starting to push back and get these basic accommodations that they need to have a community that's healthy, whole, and resilient. So even from these kind of circumstances, people can rise and be resilient as long as the folks who are facilitating recognize that there's a holistic approach that we need to be resilient. And so I'll just wrap with kind of 10 recommendations around resilience building, beginning with an equity framework involving communities most impacted at all stages, allocating funding in a transparent manner, enforcing civil and human rights laws and standards, ensuring that all the different entities that are involved are communicating with one another and coordinating with one another and being led collectively by the community, leveraging all forms of resources so that it's not just one set of resources, especially since so many of these resources are extractive in nature and design, creating means of communication to ensure that all stakeholders are very much involved and understand what's happening at all times, and so that decision-making processes are well informed, utilizing a systems approach, again, that's comprehensive and integrated, plan for unintended consequences such as gentrification, and developing systems to document and replicate so that other communities can also benefit from the same. So I will end the formal slide presentation there, and thank you.
Jackie, thank you so much. Much of what you said, you gave us examples across the country, and we know those exact examples have happened here in the Texas Gulf Coast area in the Houston region. One that grabbed my attention immediately was you were talking about pushback on road development, because we're going through that exact thing. We need to understand that whenever these facilities are built, you're solving one problem at the expense of others in so many cases. We talk about it here at Bayou Preservation from the standpoint of what are we doing to our waterways, but there's also the communities that border those waterways, which is, you know, what everything that you're talking about has illuminated on. You outlined so many things, and I loved the graphic that you showed on the children watching the baseball game. It is so illustrative of how simple this is, right?
Yes, absolutely.
But what are some of the barriers that you have seen, and this is countrywide, obviously, social, political, economic barriers to resilience building?
Yeah, so definitely, so just even taking the Louisiana situation in a similar region, one of the things that we found out after Hurricane Matthew, I believe it was, that that when the same community that was super vulnerable and was very devastated by Hurricane Katrina was inundated again, and this was 7 years after all of the levee reinforcement work had happened. And then we find out that when Senator Mary Landrieu asked the Army Corps of Engineers about why the levees hadn't been reinforced there, when we knew that was the most, if not one of the most vulnerable communities there, and there had been all that levee reinforcement work that had happened. And they said, oh, we use a formula to prioritize which levees we're going to reinforce. We apply points to each levee based on what the economic impact would be if that levee was overtaken. And so literally the most vulnerable community with that's comprised of oyster folks, fisher folks, and it was sacrificed to other communities where it's second homes, high value second homes of people who are kind of snowbirds or whatever, because those are the homes with a higher value. So I find cost benefit equations that are used and formulas that are used that don't incorporate people to be one of the biggest barriers to resilience building in terms of resources that are available and responsibility of our government systems, state, local, and federal.
So then conversely, and you're so positive in the way that you talk about this, which I think that's an energy that's necessary when we look at this. We need to talk about solutions and we need to help, right? So what gives you the hope that as we think about these threats, before us, the threats of climate impacts, specifically we just got finished talking about coastal communities. What gives you the hope that this change, the necessary change is on the way?
Yeah, I would definitely say that the more folks are understanding these systems, more folks are understanding these inequities, and we do have so whether it's the folks who really rose up around the Gulf Coast after the BP oil drilling disaster, people really got, the frontline communities got themselves educated on these systems, started to advocate for better systems, and really pushed for a different way of being in terms of how we make decisions and so forth. So that gives me hope that people are mobilizing, building power, getting involved, forcing entities that are in decision-making places to make space. Busloads of folks are heading up in Mississippi to the Public Utilities Commissions and Public Service Commission meetings that people pushed for a different route of decision-making for the Gulf Coast Fund that happened after the BP oil drilling disaster. FEMA is now being forced to have, not just advisory committees, but decision-making committees that say, here's what we need in terms of the design of your programs and processes. That people are rising up in terms of these decision-making entities, and people are rising up in terms of building the world that they want at the hyper-local level. And those are some of the examples that I was giving before as well.
One of the, we were just talking about acronyms in the previous presentation, and one of them that I got exposed to in the planning of this symposium many months ago was BIPOC. It was one that I hadn't heard before, frankly. Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So now that I know that one, let me ask, what are some of the cultural dimensions of a BIPOC community relationship with water, right? And resilience. That's what our whole symposium is about. So what is the relationship between BIPOC communities and water, and the way we should be thinking about resilience?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, so we did this this trip from where back in 2018, where it was all coastal dwelling youth, Indigenous and Black youth from Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Hawaii. And we took advantage of like some introductory fares on Iceland Air or one of these airlines for $250 round trip to go to Iceland. And what we did was we had these community gatherings in advance to really talk about our relationship with water, because it was called Linkages Across the Sea Level Rise Continuum. And we talked about our relationship with water as Black communities. We talked about our relationship with water as Indigenous communities. And then we went and we saw the very places where those melting ice caps are now ending up in our backyards, and how our relationship with water then which has been a largely positive relationship, has then, as we start to face inundation of water, it starts to shift and really start to have those conversations. Did some spoken word work around it as well. But so whether it's the history and culture of pouring libations as Black communities, the history and culture around baptism and cleansing and healing of water. So the various roles it has in kind of spiritual and cultural rituals and so forth. We talked about similarly with Indigenous culture, the ways that living on the water, relationship with the water is critical, both in terms of everything from the Gwich'in Steering Committee and their relationship with the salmon and the water and the regenerative nature of that relationship, to, again, the water rituals that the Ile de Jean Charles Band of the Biloxi Chickamauga Choctaw group that was involved in this meeting, this gathering around, again, water rituals and cleansing and water spirit cultural nuances that they talked about. So yeah, and we just talked about how, and of course, as we talked about, the mantra around the Standing Rock was water is life. And so all the ways that we rely on water just for our sheer existence, just from a hyper practical standpoint as well. And then again, we talked about the kind of the seas rising and what that means in terms of how do we continue to live in harmony and in relationship with water when Mother Earth is now saying, you've abused this, and now we're having this inundation that is taking life, that is taking home. And so how do we readjust our definition and our relationship with home now that the water is reclaiming space? And so,
or the opposite, we have feast or famine, right? We have drought and we have inundation.
Exactly,
it's either or sometimes.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Fascinating. I really appreciate your comments today. This has been wonderful. One of the comments in our chat is to remember to share the video links that you mentioned, if you wouldn't mind putting those in there. But we will also publish those on our website. And once again, to all of our attendees, today's entire presentations will be available on our website shortly. Just got to button up all the technology stuff and get it uploaded. So, Jackie, thank you so much for your participation in our symposium.
Pleasure.
We hope to see you again.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So, final presentation by our guests today. We want to welcome Teal Harrison, who is a climate resilience specialist and Adaptation International. It's a partner of the Floodwise Communities Project, and Teal's going to highlight the project's working experience in the Gulf Coast communities to build adaptive stormwater management and resilience capacity via the Floodwise Communities tool. She's also going to share preliminary results from their efforts to develop and implement community-driven resources that increase access to adaptation planning and action for under-resourced communities, which is a perfect follow-up to our previous presentation. So welcome, Teal. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Can y'all hear me okay?
We can hear you, we can see you, and you're good to go.
All right, I'm gonna get my screen set up. Okay, so as Chris mentioned, my name is Teal Harrison, and I'm a climate resilience specialist with Adaptation International. I have to say it is tough to follow such a powerful presentation from Ms. Jackie Patterson, but nevertheless, I am very grateful for the opportunity to talk to you today about merging research and practice, the Floodwise community's experience. Right. As we know, in recent years, more state, county, and local governments have initiated or enhanced their preparedness for future climate conditions and impacts. These preparations often take the form of adaptation, resilience, and other action plans. Arguably, the most successful of these plans and initiatives are informed by vulnerability assessments that evaluate climate exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity of a community's priority systems or the community as a whole. Yet, there are communities who face a last mile issue when it comes to completing comprehensive vulnerability assessments and engaging in proactive climate planning. Apologies for the screen distraction there. This can be especially true regardless of how much they want to opt for resilience. At the local level, we are familiar with communities that get stuck in cycles of disaster response and recovery, often with little to no time to catch a breath before another disaster strikes. So, at the heart of my talk and of the Floodwise Communities Project is a desire to identify and address the last mile issues that under-resourced communities encounter on their road to building community resilience, and doing so in ways that work well for them. So Floodwise has been co-developed to address several barriers to entry to vulnerability assessment specifically, which, as I mentioned, is a key step in the planning process. And these are monetary and time costs, people power, access to data, technical assistance, and cross-sector collaborations. So what do we mean by co-developing solutions? We mean collaborative research working with local governments to not only design, but also test and improve technologies and resources that make vulnerability assessments more accessible and yield actionable results for communities. So in the Floodwise project, what does this look like? Well, presently, this looks like engaging with small, medium, and otherwise under-resourced communities, and providing no-cost tailored trainings on vulnerability assessments and supplementary resources to those who are interested in this method of either increasing or enhancing a resilience efforts in their community. So as you can see, there's been actually several phases of this project. And so we're currently in phase 3. We've gone from a project that was originated by local governments in the Great Lakes region to a project that has been customized and specialized to Gulf Coast communities, focused on stormwater system vulnerability specifically, and utilizes an online tool. So in doing this, the project asks and hopes to answer whether a standard template created by a handful of practitioners in one region can also yield tailored and usable results for dozens of communities in another region facing different climate hazards and disasters. So over the last 2 years, Floodwise Communities has been working with over 50 counties, governments, towns, parishes along the Gulf Coast to complete tailored stormwater system vulnerability assessments using a more refined and streamlined version of the tools that came in phases 1 and 2. Each community participating in the project assembled a team of local practitioners or officials to participate in the assessment, with at least one working directly with their stormwater system. We encouraged cross-departmental collaboration, and as requested, we actually supported communities in building teams. And as you can see, we had a variety of folks participate in assessment teams, from public works to sustainability. Further, you can see that a large chunk of our participating communities come from the state of Texas, We had 15 participating Texas Gulf Coast communities, including cities and counties in the Houston-Galveston area, all the way down the coastal bend. So this map not only shows the various small and medium-sized communities that we worked with in this project, but also highlights the various ways that they actually completed the training. So these are self-guided trainings, webinar trainings, or in-person trainings with our staff. And it's always nice just to look at this visual and see, the scope of the impact that we hope that we're having. So if I may, I would like to share a few more details about the assessment process before I get into our results. So some of the key characteristics of the Floodwise Floodwise Communities Vulnerability Assessment process are that it's a relative assessment, it's a qualitative assessment informed by the best available data, it's collaborative, and it's holistic. So what do I mean by holistic? That means we developed the assessment to look at both the physical, cultural, and social dimensions in a community, their intersections and interactions, and how local practitioners, stormwater practitioners can account for these. It also includes an emphasis on green infrastructure and non-structural solutions, as well as multi-beneficial actions to build resilience. Further, the assessment training itself walks through the following steps of the vulnerability assessment process. So that's analyzing exposure. This is both baseline conditions, future conditions, and looking at social vulnerability as well. Assessing sensitivity and adaptive capacity, and interpreting results and identifying next steps. All right, a bit more about the tool. As I mentioned, the tool has been developed to be specific to Gulf Coast communities, and multiple team members can work on their local assessment at the same time. They are guided by a series of probing questions about their individual stormwater system components, some of which you can see here. And these can include outfalls, open ditches, pipes, bioswales. And then they rank the relative vulnerability of these stormwater system components as it pertains to the climate events and hazards that are their greatest concern. So there's nearly 30 conventional, low impact, and natural system components that can be assessed in this tool. Further, the tool and training also feature case studies, including one from Katy Prairie, as well as Port Aransas. So a bit about the data. As a part of the process, communities are provided with climate data as well as socioeconomic data. So the climate profiles that communities are provided are summaries of precipitation, heat, flood, and sea level rise data where applicable. And I also want to highlight the socioeconomic data because I feel like this is something that might be perhaps of use to a lot of folks in this room trying to navigate how we can build equitable climate resilience. So we work with communities on training the Neighborhoods at Risk tool. And this tool is a social vulnerability mapping tool that also produces extremely detailed reports and looks at the intersection of social vulnerability and climate risk factors. And so this includes Black and Brown and Indigenous community members, disabled community members, renters, folks without cars, non-English speaking folks, or folks with limited literacy. And it also looks at areas in the hurricane flood zone, lacking tree canopy with a high degree of impervious cover, and several other factors. Another cool part about this Neighborhoods at Risk tool, which you can see here on the right side, is that it is nationally available and works at the census tract level to identify these intersections. But it actually was born out of the first two phases of this project as it was identified by need of our Great Lakes communities. So as I mentioned, participants are trained on how to use neighborhoods at risk to identify current and anticipated impacts, inadequacies or vulnerabilities in their stormwater system can have on their residents, especially those who are marginalized on the front lines or otherwise historically underserved, as well as the impacts it can have on other critical aspects and services in the community. So the outputs of this vulnerability assessment process include a vulnerability matrix, which I have pictured here, that visualizes the relative vulnerabilities of the stormwater infrastructure components, both the level of vulnerability as well as how many components fall at that vulnerability level. And this is important because it makes it easier to identify areas to direct resources to first. The tool also generates a report that details all of the work that communities input into the tool. And we also produce a customizable report for participating communities that includes an executive summary, appendices, and introduction, and is just more readily usable to not only stand alone, but have parts of it be incorporated into existing plans, presentations, etc. And number 3, these customizable report templates were actually created in direct response to feedback that we've gotten from our current cohort of communities as to what can make this process more helpful. All right, let's talk about some results. So our vulnerability assessments, post-surveys, interviews, and tool analytics are still being collected and analyzed. But there are several early findings that I can provide. The first of these are participant experiences. So based on post interviews that we've conducted so far, 2 recurring themes that we found are that participants greatly benefited from the opportunity to work with their colleagues in other departments. Interestingly, we found that self-guided trainings were more successful though in communities that already were working collaboratively and otherwise, more well organized. Whereas workshop trainings are more beneficial or have been more beneficial for communities that may have been a little bit more siloed. And this is because it offered a structured opportunity for folks to get into the same room and discuss critical issues. Further, the assessment process highlighted for participants additional partnerships that are necessary, but they might not have already established for comprehensive adaptation planning. And so these can be upstream, downstream partnerships with other jurisdictions, state and county partnerships, for example, as well as partnerships with residents, organizations, and the private sector. We've also got preliminary results on the data tools and resources that we've provided communities. For the weather and climate data, we found that communities that have greater access to local climate data actually engage with this resource less. On the other hand, we also encountered some folks throughout the process who may have been skeptical of climate change and ultimately expressed trust not only in the data that we did provide, as well as our team's credibility in navigating folks through that data and applying it to their stormwater vulnerability assessment. As far as the social vulnerability mapping goes, we found high levels of engagement with the Neighborhoods at Risk tool, which is really exciting. Folks wanted multiple representations of the social vulnerability data. So another direct response to this feedback was actually producing shapefiles for all communities that can be downloaded in addition to the Excel and PDF reports that detail all of the census data and climate data that go into that tool. One theme from communities completing the vulnerability assessment is that people with fewer resources have more difficult times recovering from disasters and do not have the resources to take on flood mitigation projects from their homes. For example, an engineer in one of our Texas Gulf Coast communities said that Mother Nature does not care if you are rich or poor, but it is the ability to bounce back that is affected by your socioeconomic status. And that is why we care. The use of the Neighborhoods at Risk tool in this training also highlighted for them the degree of many older residents and individuals with mobility and health concerns, like those who are on dialysis, living in floodplain prone areas. All right, let's talk about implementation. We also have insights from several communities that have already identified how they will implement the assessment. And as I explained before, interpreting results and looking at next steps is a core part of this assessment process. So communities are planning to use the assessment to apply to state and federal grants, prioritize their stormwater projects and other adaptation projects, and communicate data and results to various local audiences, including their decision makers, local partners, and the public. Lastly, I want to share regional insights, so specific to the Texas Gulf Coast, on adaptive capacity, essentially the constraints, assets, and opportunities that communities generally have had when it comes to opting for resilience, engaging in adaptive stormwater management. So there are many constraints listed here, but stormwater professionals in the Texas Gulf Coast firstly expressed great concern about the size of their stormwater systems, that they're failing to accommodate these intense rainfall events, and even events that aren't associated with tropical storms and hurricanes. Sea level rise, storm surge, heat, and drought conditions were also frequently discussed as potential hazards and factors that put strain on existing infrastructure and aging infrastructure. Money and manpower also came up frequently as big constraints to adapting their stormwater systems to climate change. For example, though a community could be successful in getting grants, doing things like upsizing pipes or going after much needed projects would depend on the mix of the right funding, in addition to administrative and public support and the appropriate staff. One thing that I found interesting, and this might be specific, to this new pandemic era, is that a lot of communities also cited supply chain issues as a constraint in their work. As far as assets, one community mentioned that the drainage district relationship was very important to in that the entity can be a partner for getting grants, but recognize that also it can be a constraint as well if not navigated appropriately. Other assets and opportunities that communities discussed included community education and involvement in stormwater management, proactive maintenance, nature-based and green infrastructure solutions, and looking at codes and regulations that can support resilience building. All right, so what's next? While Floodwise was thoughtfully designed and is intended to support under-resourced communities by saving time, energy, and monetary costs, there is always room for improvement. So we will continue to analyze the data that's coming in from our participating communities and have candid conversations with practitioners across the Gulf about what inputs and outputs worked for them and did not work for them. We also hope to better understand more generally the factors that influence day-to-day and major decisions about stormwater management, adaptation, equity, and resilience, including barriers and benchmarks and some of those up and downs that Ms. Patterson highlighted in our previous discussion. The next phases of this work include improving the tool based on this feedback, recruiting new community cohorts to trial the Floodwise communities. Folks are looking at maybe returning to the Great Lakes or other regions, and exploring funding opportunities to support adapting the tool to be usable at a national level, as well as transferable across systems. So for example, to your electric grid, and supporting multi-jurisdictional assessments and projects, regional flood planning, for example. Lastly, there are many other questions that we'd like to explore. For example, can we bolster the equity, environment, and environmental justice capacity building aspects of this training for local government practitioners? Additionally, can we better align this tool and resource with existing initiatives like the community rating system, or even connecting it with some of the tools and resources that folks have presented on over the last 2 days? And all of these ambitions are motivated by the project's excuse me. All of these are motivated by the project's origins. working with communities and researchers to co-develop useful tools that, in the face of a changing climate, build local government capacity to opt for resilience. And with that, I want to say thank you to the Bayou Preservation Association, the Symposium Planning Committee, my fellow project partners, our funders, and most importantly, I want to thank you for your time and attention. All right.
Well, Teal, you followed Jackie Patterson brilliantly. No worries about that. We appreciate you being here today. I'm interested to know, you have a very data-driven approach to this, and entering these communities. Did that how well were they able to absorb the data and get interested in the solutions that were being talked about in their communities? Was that a difficult process for them, or was the factual data a way to communicate reality that then they could wake up to?
Yeah, I would most definitely say it's the latter, and that at this phase in the project, we have refined those data tools and resources. So the weather and climate profiles we provide, as well as the social vulnerability mapping tool and data, to both present a digestible picture, right, of their baseline conditions and future conditions as it pertains to risk and vulnerability, but also have that be rooted, in the detailed data, and making that accessible for communities to access. So essentially, they can kind of start at this level and go as deep as they want. But we are finding that, it does give that snapshot in a way that can be readily applied into the assessment. And we also find, especially as it pertains to neighborhoods at risk, that people really do want to dive deeper, and they are motivated by that and would like, other representations of this data, tailored to, various end users. So,
yeah, okay. Are you looking for more communities yourself, or are you being asked by others to come to their community because of the work you've already done, or is both of those things happening?
So we had a very extensive recruitment process from 2020 to 2021, and our goal was to work with close to 60 communities, and we were quite close to that, over 50 communities that we've worked with. So at this point, we're kind of in the post-engagement phase, though I actually did hear from someone the other day about the project, and we try to accommodate folks as much as possible with the projects. The tool that we're using, though it will be refined, is always available to our participants, and we welcome anyone who is kind of interested in that method, though they might not make it into maybe the data analysis portion. But if it's valuable to their resilience building efforts and adaptive stormwater management, we are open to that. Similarly, I guess I'll say that we've also explored opportunities working with community groups on using this tool to do their own on the ground assessments and use this as an advocacy tool to local governments for projects that they would like to see in their neighborhoods.
Right. Yeah, and it seems like the data would be useful for so many as a planning tool. Excellent work. I can't say enough. And it seems to match perfectly with our mission statement. And I think we're going to be swell partners as time moves forward. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you.
And with that, I'm going to bring back our president and CEO for some final remarks. Brittani Flowers is out there somewhere. There she is. You're still, get your mute button there.
After all these years, it's
I know it's your favorite thing, right? You just like being seen, not heard.
I know.
No, you don't. You like talking.
Well, especially in these spaces, there's so much good information being shared around. I do like to reiterate and build on the discussions that are taking place. And so to that point, I want to thank all of the presenters, all of those who have stuck with us throughout these 8 hours of educational and informative presentations and dialogue. I also want to thank those who have placed their comments and questions into the chat to continue the discussion, not just currently, but as we move to the future, as well as those who participated in the surveys prior to the bio breaks. That information helps to inform the direction and the topics that we select for our upcoming symposiums, as well as the events and activities that we plan for the upcoming year. So again, thank you all for that. And as Chris mentioned, we want to be mindful of your time, and we want to, again, make sure that you're able to absorb all of what we learned, quickly go on LinkedIn and connect with those presenters and those organizations that have projects and programs that are in line with the work that you're doing to continue to build on those discussions. And so internally, Bayou Preservation has put together an action agenda for attendees, and so that we can continue again to build on this discussion, as well as to inform the upcoming symposium for 2023. So I'll share my screen so that you all can get to that information, as well as be able to reference it once the Zoom has concluded. So if you visit our website and you come to the news and events page, under events, you can visit the 19th annual symposium page. As you scroll down, we have uploaded the post-symposium action agenda here. It's a live link, you can click on it. And there's live links as well inside the document. So we encourage you to follow up to sign up with our newsletter, opt in to receive those communications so you can know about our next educational opportunity and workshop, as well as networking and mixer events. There's also going to, as Chris has mentioned, throughout the symposium, we will be uploading all the presentations as well as the recordings to our YouTube page. So you can visit the link and you can explore last year's symposium as we're getting all the final touches completed to upload this 2022 symposium. Again, I encourage you all to make connections on LinkedIn. I was very fortunate to meet a number of the attendees last night at the Mixer. And so my LinkedIn profile has been getting a lot of engagement. So I feel very popular. Thank you all for that. And then lastly, we have on November 1st, our 12th annual Terry Hershey Bayou Steward Award luncheon. That luncheon will take place at the Junior League of Houston. And so that we hope that you'll visit the website, learn more about the history of that award, as well as take place in purchasing tickets or supporting that annual luncheon. And we'll also be hosting another mixer similar to the symposium mixer yesterday evening in December. That'll be on December 9th. But you must subscribe to the newsletter to find out the location. So that's what we have coming up for the end of the year. And we have some exciting end of year activities that we'll also be announcing in our upcoming newsletter. So Chris.
Yeah, no, great. Thank you for illuminating us on all of that. And there are the website's a great way to find us. We do have a Facebook page as well. We have our LinkedIn page, and we would love everyone to join us and hear about what we're doing next and become active. And we have a number of committees that do excellent work. The Symposium Committee is just one of them. We have many of them that we get outdoors too. That's the fun part of what we do, right? We need to be down in the bayous and experiencing them. So check us out. We hope to see everyone again next year. And this has been a wonderful event. I would say we have adapted to this virtual world fairly well. And we appreciate your feedback in trying to figure out what the right move is for next year's symposium. We're going to take that very seriously and think about how to engage everyone in the best way possible. Seems like the hybrid answer was the one that came out the most, but that's a very interesting new way that we're going to have to think about this. And I appreciate that input. But I think that we are done for the day, and given that we had a 12 o'clock deadline, we are 2 minutes shy. That's awesome. Thank everyone, just like Brittani said, for participating, for asking the great questions, and thank you for thanking us. We very much appreciate it, but this doesn't happen without a team, and thanks goes out to everyone at HGAC who helps us out in these years. They have done a tremendous job, particularly Andrea Tantillo. She's done an amazing job. And then our staff, Ryan Francisco at Biopreservation Association, all the background work that just makes us on camera seem that much more intelligent. But we thank everyone once again. This has been a great 2 days, 2 mornings. Look for us to do this again next year with another new topic, engaging our bayous, our watersheds, and our greatest natural resource, which is, of course, our bayous. Thank you so much. We are adjourned.